Hey there, dear friends. Today we're diving into the fascinating world of weird ways people stayed warm before central heating. Imagine a time when your only defense against winter's chill wasn't a thermostat, but clever tricks, cozy clothing, and a crackling hearth. We'll wander through history, uncovering the curious, the inventive, and sometimes downright strange ways humans kept the cold at bay. This video is here to help you unwind, drift into a gentle calm, and maybe even spark a bit of wide-eyed wonder. You might end up learning something so quirky that your brain perks right up. If you enjoy the journey, a like or subscribe goes a long way in helping the channel grow. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Paris at midnight, a tiny cabin in Scotland, or even from a hammock in Singapore, and maybe what you're sipping while you watch. Now, take a slow breath. Let yourself settle, like fog curling over a quiet lake or so softly landing on pine needles. Let go of the day and just drift with the story. So put on your headphones, close your eyes. It's made for relaxation and learning. Ready? Let's begin. Imagine, if you will, the quiet of an ancient winter's night. The sky outside is a deep, unbroken black. The stars sharp and brilliant in the clear air. A layer of frost clings to the bare branches of trees, and the ground crunches underfoot. But inside, within the walls of human dwellings, things are not much warmer. For most of history, before the invention of central heating and the hum of boilers, radiators, or vents, the cold was not something that could be shut out entirely. It was a presence, a daily reality, something to be endured, battled, and occasionally outwitted. Today, warmth is a luxury so commonplace that we hardly notice it. With the flick of a switch or the turning of a dial, entire homes bloom into comfort. Yet for the vast majority of human existence, warmth was hard-won. Fires smoked, blankets itched, and drafts crept under doors and through windows, biting at toes and fingers. To truly appreciate the modern miracle of central heating, we must first look back at the strange, inventive, and sometimes desperate measures our ancestors took to keep themselves from freezing. Cold, after all, is no small enemy. In Britain and across Europe, winters could be cruel. Harsh winds swept across open fields, rivers froze, and food supplies dwindled. For the poor, the cold was often as deadly as famine. For the wealthy, though they might have had thicker walls and larger fires, the chill still gnawed at their bones. Castles and manor houses were draughty places. Even palaces could be icy, their grand halls filled with tapestries and carpets in a constant attempt to trap some degree of warmth. The cold was democratic. It reached into cottages and palaces alike. But let us imagine ourselves in the skin of those long ago. You wake in the morning, your breath visible in the air before you. The sheets are stiff with frost at the edges, and the floor beneath your feet is stone cold, unforgiving. The fire you banked the night before has dwindled to ashes. To rise from bed is to enter a world where each step is a reminder that you live not in a cocoon of comfort, but in a climate that constantly challenges you. It is here that humanity showed both resilience and ingenuity. Before central heating, warmth was not something you could count upon evenly filling a room. Heat came from a single source, most often a fire. In early human shelters, this might have been little more than a pit in the floor where wood, peat, or dung smouldered. The smoke, thick and choking, filled the air, seeping through cracks in roofs or holes in the walls. There was no chimney, no flue to carry it away neatly. Instead, people lived amid smoke and embers, the fire both their saviour and their constant irritant. Yet this was the heart of life, a place where families gathered, where food was cooked, and where stories were told. As societies developed, the methods of staying warm became more elaborate, though not always more comfortable. The Romans, with their engineering genius, devised the hypocaust system, pumping warm air beneath floors and through walls in bathhouses and villas. In colder parts of the world, people turned to fur and wool, layering themselves until they resembled bundles of cloth and hair. In some places, families slept together in one bed, not from sentiment alone, but from necessity. Body heat shared was body heat saved. The strangeness of some of these customs cannot be overstated. Imagine slipping into bed with not only your spouse or children, but perhaps extended family, servants, or even guests. all pressed together like a nest of kittens. Privacy was a concept reserved for the rich, but warmth was a need felt by all. In barns and cottages, people sometimes went further still. It is tempting from our vantage point to smile at these cows, pigs, and sheep as quaint sources of food, but little more than radiators of heat in history. Their warm bodies, yet we must remember that these were strategies born of necessity. Created a microclimate that made the difference between surviving the winter or perishing in it. Barely more than a century old. For thousands of years before, people relied on their wits and on whatever resources they could muster. Some of these methods were clever, others rather questionable, but all of them reveal a story of adaptation, of resilience, and of the human refusal to simply lie down and freeze. In this series we shall journey through those stories. We shall visit the smoky halls of the medieval world, where tapestries hung thick and great hearths roared, yet the stone floors still numbed the toes. We shall wander into Tudor bedrooms where bed-warming pans filled with coals slid between sheets to chase away the chill. We shall marvel at the ingenuity of hot bricks wrapped in cloth, of heated irons placed at the foot of the bed, of bottles filled with boiling water, each a precursor to the modern hot water bottle we know today. We will also step outside Britain to see how others coped. The Norwegians wrapped in reindeer skins, the Russians tucked against great masonry stoves that radiated heat for hours, the Japanese seated around low tables with charcoal braziers beneath, their legs draped in thick quilts, creating cosy micro-worlds of warmth within otherwise cold houses. Everywhere, humanity sought the same solution to the same universal problem, how to banish the cold. And there were rituals too. Drinks taken before bed, strong ales, mulled wines, or hot possets to put fire in the belly. Foods rich and fatty to stoke the inner furnace of the body. Nightcaps, not only as garments for the head, but as symbols of the nightly war against the chill. Folklore whispered of spirits that brought frost, of witches who could summon winter's bite, of charms and prayers said to keep the cold at bay. Warmth was never merely physical, it was cultural, spiritual, psychological. The history of warmth, in a way, is the history of comfort. It tells us how people lived, what they valued, and how they balanced hardship with ingenuity. And when we speak of the odd, the weird, the inventive ways people stayed warm, we are not merely recounting curiosities, we are telling the story of survival. So let us begin here, at the threshold. We stand at the doorway of a long corridor of history, lined with flickering fires, with steaming pots, with beds piled high with furs and feathers. The corridor smells of smoke and wool, of damp straw and heated iron. It echoes with the crackle of flames, the soft murmurs of families huddled close, the snort of a cow in the next room. It is cold, yet it is alive. And through this corridor we shall walk together, step by step, discovering the strange, remarkable ways our ancestors found warmth in a world where the cold was always waiting. For this is not merely a history of heating. It is a story of human endurance, of resourcefulness, and of the long, long battle against the winter. A battle that, in many ways, defined how people lived their lives. And so the fire is lit. Fire, more than any other discovery, led us to the fate of humankind. Wrap ourselves in words to picture a world without its glow. And begin this journey into the weird ways people stayed warm before central heating. Yet in the earliest days, fire was not ours to command. It came as lightning striking a tree, as a blaze in the undergrowth, as something wild and terrifying. The first humans must have approached it with fear and awe, for here was a force that devoured wood, leapt unpredictably, and gave off both light and unbearable heat. And yet, when finally mastered, it became the centerpiece of life. To speak of staying warm before central heating is, in truth, to speak of fire itself. For fire was the original heater, the one tool against the night that has never entirely left us. Imagine a small group of our ancestors, huddled in a cave or beneath an overhang of rock. Outside the air is bitter. Perhaps snowflakes drift across the opening, or the wind howls through trees stripped bare of their leaves. Inside, though, in the circle of flickering light, things are different. The flames crackle, shadows leap and dance across stone walls, and the people lean closer, hands stretched out, faces ruddy in the glow. Here, warmth is not just physical comfort, it is life itself. Fire chases away the chill, keeps predators at bay, and cooks the meat that sustains the body. To be cold was to be vulnerable, to be warm was to be safe, Yet fire in its earliest forms was no cosy domestic hearth. The smoke stung the eyes, clung to the hair and filled the lungs. There were no chimneys, no flues, nothing but holes in the roof or gaps in the walls for the fumes to escape. Some groups even lived in semi-subterranean huts where fires smouldered at the centre, filling the space with a thick haze. Archaeologists have found blackened ceilings in prehistoric dwellings, evidence of centuries of smoky living. We might think this unbearable, but for those who lived it, the smoke was part of life. Irritating, yes, but preferable to the numbing bite of cold. As settlements grew, fire became more organised. Hearths were built, often circular, ringed with stones to keep embers contained. In some cases, raised platforms of clay or stone were used, lifting the fire slightly above ground level, providing not only heat but also a sense of permanence. A fire in the middle of the floor was no longer just an accident of survival, it was the beating heart of a home. Around it meals were shared, around it stories were told, around it warmth was distributed in precious waves. We often forget how much effort it took to keep a fire alive. Wood had to be gathered daily, hauled back in bundles from forests or hedgerows. In areas without trees, people resorted to peat, cut from bogs and dried into bricks. In others, dried dung from cattle or horses became the only option. Once lit, a fire was rarely allowed to die completely. To rekindle from cold ashes meant striking flints, coaxing sparks, and blowing patiently at thin wisps of smoke. Far easier to bank the fire overnight, to cover the embers with ash, smothering them enough to prevent open flames, yet keeping a core of heat alive until morning. Each day began with stirring those embers back to life, coaxing them into flame once again. The hearth was more than a convenience, it was a constant responsibility, and the warmth it gave was deeply uneven. Those nearest the fire roasted, while those furthest away shivered. It was a perpetual dance, moving closer until the skin prickled and burned, then retreating back into the cool, only to edge forward again. In large spaces, like the halls of early chiefs or kings, fires might blaze fiercely. Fire shaped culture as much as it shaped comfort, escaping into rafters. The hearth was sacred in many the lower reaches cold, a place of gods and spirits. Accounts from the medieval period describe how one might be warm on one side and freezing on the other. The flame of the hearth, a peculiar and a sacred fire in Rome was tended by priestesses who ensured it never went out. In Norse mythology, fire was associated with both creation and destruction, a force as divine as it was dangerous. Even in later Christian households, the hearth retained a special significance. Prayers were sometimes said as fires were lit, blessings whispered over the flames that would guard the family through another cold night. But the warmth of fire was always costly. Woodlands vanished under the axe as populations grew, leading to shortages that forced innovation. In Britain, the scarcity of timber in later centuries drove people to mine coal, a change that transformed not only warmth, but the entire economy. Earlier still, people learned to burn peat, cut from bogs, stacked to dry in the weak summer sun, and stored for the long months of winter. Peat smoke clung to clothes, to walls, to every object it touched, leaving behind an odour that was unmistakable. Yet for countless families, it was all that stood between them and the bitter cold. Even so, fire was rarely enough. Walls were draughty, windows mere holes or covered with oiled cloth, doors ill-fitting. A fire might warm the body when seated nearby, but nights were still a trial. People crawled under heaps of wool, furs, or straw to conserve the heat their bodies generated. Fires smouldered low for safety, meaning that bedrooms were often as cold as the outdoors. To step out of bed was to enter a world where breath once again misted in the air. Fire, magnificent as it was, could not conquer the chill entirely, and yet, for all its limitations, fire remained the centre. It was where families gathered, where warmth was shared, where survival began. Its smoke irritated, its fuel consumed labour, its heat was capricious, but without it life in colder regions would have been impossible. Fire was the first and most enduring answer to winter's challenge. It is here, at the heart of civilization, that we see the earliest beginnings of humanity's strange dance with warmth. From smoky caves to peat fires, from sacred hearths to weary households banking embers, the story is one of persistence. The cold was always waiting outside the circle of light, always pressing in at the edges. Fire pushed it back imperfectly, but with enough strength to let life flourish. And so, before we move on to Roman engineering and medieval halls, we pause here by the crackling hearth to reflect on the simple, enduring truth. Gleaming marble temples with flame, soldiers in disciplined ranks, aqueducts carrying water across valleys. Yet among their many achievements, one of the most quietly transformative was their conquest of cold. For the Romans were among the first to take warmth seriously, not merely as the accident of a fire burning in the middle of a room, but as something that could be engineered, directed, and made to flow. Their answer was ingenious, and it was called the hypocaust. The word itself comes from Greek meaning heat from below, and that is precisely what it was, a system of heating in which hot air, drawn from a furnace, was channeled beneath the floors of a building and sometimes up through its walls. Imagine stepping into a villa on a crisp winter's morning, the air outside sharp enough to sting the lungs. You cross the threshold and suddenly the floor beneath your feet radiates gentle heat, as though the very earth itself has been coaxed into kindness. For the Romans, this was not gone fantasy. It was daily reality for those wealthy enough to afford such a marvel. The hypocaust worked by elevating floors upon a series of small pillars, creating a hollow space beneath. Into this cavity, hot air and smoke were funneled from a furnace usually stoked with wood. The heat would spread under the floor, warming the tiles or slabs above, before escaping through flues set in the walls. The result was a kind of ancient underfloor heating, remarkably effective and astonishingly sophisticated. Entire bathhouses were heated this way, their pools steaming in the chill of winter, the very walls humming with warmth. Consider the luxury of it. In a world where most people huddled by smoky hearths, shifting awkwardly to keep one side from freezing while the other roasted, the Romans walked barefoot across warm stone floors. They reclined in rooms where the air was pleasantly temperate, their comfort maintained not by chance but by design. It was as though the climate itself had been bent to their will. No wonder the Roman bathhouses became centres of social life, not merely places for washing but for conversation, relaxation and business. To be warm in winter was not only a comfort, it was a statement of civilization itself. Yet, as with all Roman achievements, there was a cost. The hypocaust required constant attention. Furnaces had to be stoked, wood had to be supplied, and the labour to maintain such systems was immense. Slaves or servants bore the brunt of this work, sweating in the heat of the furnace rooms, ensuring that the upper classes could recline in effortless luxury. For the wealthy, warmth was easy. For the poor, it remained elusive. Most Romans lived not in heated villas but in insulae, crowded apartment blocks where drafts crept through cracks and fires were risky. The idea that warmth could be distributed evenly, that a building could be designed with heating in mind, was a leap of imagination. The hypocaust, splendid though it was a privilege of the few indirectly. Public bathhouses across the empire often boasted hypocaust systems, meaning that even the ordinary citizen could, for a few coins, bask in warmth and steam. To step into such a bathhouse with its misty air and tiled splendour must have felt like entering another world. Outside, the cold gnawed. Inside, the body relaxed, the muscles softened, the chill melted away. It is telling that when the Roman Empire faltered and fell, the art of the hypocaust largely vanished with it. Across much of Europe, the centuries that followed saw a return to simpler methods. Smoky hearths, draughty halls, the crude but enduring companionship of fire. Archaeologists have uncovered ruins of villas where hypocaust pillars still stand, silent reminders of a lost comfort. To the people who lived among those ruins later, the system must have seemed a marvel from another age, mysterious in its sophistication. For nearly 1,000 years after Rome's collapse, Europeans shivered once more in cold stone buildings, the memory of heated floors little more than a whisper. The contrast between Roman warmth and medieval chill is stark. In a Roman villa, one might walk across warm marble, steam rising gently from pools. In a medieval castle, one might sit shivering beside a roaring hearth, feet numb despite the flames. The Romans had glimpsed a world where warmth could be managed by design. Yet that knowledge slipped away, as fragile as the empire itself. It would be many centuries before underfloor heating re-emerged in Europe. In the meantime, people had to make do with simpler, stranger methods. but we shall come to those in time. For now it is enough to marvel at the Hippocaust. It stands as proof of what human ingenuity could achieve even 2,000 years ago. The principle remains with us, in modern systems of central heating and radiant floors. We think ourselves advanced, yet the Romans were already treading on heated stone, already living in spaces where warmth flowed unseen. They set a standard that the world would long remember, even as the centuries grew colder. And so we leave the Romans, basking in their steamy bathhouses, reclining in villas where warmth rose from beneath their feet. Outside in the countryside, peasants gathered around humble fires, their cloaks pulled tight, their breath misting in the air. But in the cities, in the places of privilege, the Hippocaust glowed, a hidden engine of comfort. For them, the cold had been conquered, at least for a while, and for us, their achievement is a reminder. Faded, central heating systems crumbled into machinery. The art is not so very new after all. With it. It is in many ways an old life shifted into a different rhythm. Stone fortresses rose on hillsides, their towers bristling with battlements, their walls thick and foreboding. Castles, those symbols of medieval power, were designed for defence, not for comfort. Their architecture spoke of survival against enemies rather than against the cold, and so, while their walls kept out raiders and arrows, they did little to keep out the bitter winter air. To live in a castle was to live in a fortress against men, but not against frost. Step inside a medieval great hall and the truth becomes clear. The hall was the beating heart of castle life, a vast chamber where lord and household gathered. At its centre blazed a fire, often no more than a pit dug into the floor, or later, a great hearth against one wall. The flames might leap high, smoke billowing into the rafters, but the heat they produced rarely reached far. Those closest to the fire roasted until their skin prickled. Those a few paces away sat shivering, their breath clouding the air. The scale of the hall itself defeated the flame. Heat rose, vanishing into the high roof, leaving draughts swirling at ground level. The smoke, too, was a constant companion. Early halls had no chimneys. The smoke was left to find its own way out through louvres in the roof or simply through cracks. This meant the air was often thick and choking. Imagine trying to eat or to converse while a haze of smoke curled about your head, stinging your eyes. Walls might be blackened by centuries of soot, rafters coated in a greasy film. For the medieval household, smoke was not a nuisance to be avoided. It was an accepted part of daily life. Yet despite the discomfort, the fire remained essential. Without it, the stone walls would have been unbearable prisons of cold. To combat the draughts, people relied upon fabric. Tapestries were hung along walls, not merely for decoration but as insulation. Woven thick with wool, often depicting scenes of hunting or legend, they served to block some of the icy breath of stone. Beneath feet, rushes were strewn across the floor, reeds and grasses, sometimes mixed with herbs, which provided a measure of warmth against the chill of bare flagstones. These rushes absorbed dirt, spills, and much else besides, and so were changed periodically. The smell of herbs helped to sweeten the air, though in truth, life in a great hall was never fragrant. Clothing, too, played its role. Medieval garments were layered and voluminous, cloaks of wool, fur-lined hoods, thick hose, and padded tunics. The wealthy might drape themselves in ermine or fox, while the poor relied on coarse wool. A cloak could be drawn about the body like a portable blanket, a necessity when stone corridors channeled draughts like icy rivers. In bed the layering continued. Mattresses stuffed with straw, feather beds for the fortunate, and piles of blankets or furs. Even so, to wake with frost on one's coverlets was not uncommon. The contrast between wealth and poverty was stark. For the peasant in a timber hut, a single hearth provided warmth for the entire family. Smoke filled the single room, finding its way out through a hole in the roof. Livestock often shared the space, their bodies adding heat to the human company. For the lord in his castle, the fire was grander, the hall larger, but the cold was not banished. Stone might protect from invaders, but it was an unforgiving material. Winter seeped through it relentlessly. Even kings and queens shivered in their chambers, their breath misting in the air, their servants piling furs upon their beds. The invention of the chimney in the later Middle Ages changed matters somewhat. By giving smoke a controlled path out of the building, it allowed fires to burn more cleanly and efficiently. It also made it possible to heat smaller rooms, rather than relying solely on the cavernous Great Hall. Yet chimneys were slow to spread, expensive to build, and still far from perfect. Fires remained smoky, rooms drafty, warmth uneven. The chimney was a step forward, but it was not the revolution that central heating would one day bring. It is easy from our vantage point to see the romance in the Great Hall, the flickering firelight, the long tables, the lords and ladies feasting beneath banners. But romance fades when one remembers the cold. The medieval winter was not a gentle thing. It bit hard, settling into bones, seeping into stone. To stay warm required not just fire, but ingenuity, resilience, and acceptance. The hall might be grand, the tapestries rich, the hearth roaring, yet still the cold lingered in corners, whispering its reminder that human mastery was incomplete. And yet, despite it all, people endured. They sang, they told stories, they feasted, they lived. Cold was simply part of life, as natural as hunger or thirst. In its own way, it shaped the rhythm of the year. Winter was a season of closeness, of huddling together, of shared meals around the fire. Warmth was not guaranteed, and so it was savoured. Each crackle of flame, each blanket pulled close, each rush of heat upon frozen fingers, all these were small victories. The medieval castle, for all its strength and splendour, was not a warm place. Its walls stood strong against foes, but they let in the icy breath of winter without mercy. The great hall, smoky and draughty, was both haven and hardship, yet within its shadows and beneath its tapestries life persisted. And though we may shudder at the thought of such chill, there is something in that endurance, something in the image of people gathered close in the flickering half-light, that speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. The fire of the Romans had faded, the Hippocaust forgotten, but the flame itself endured, carried into the heart of every hall, every hut, every home. If the fire was the heart of the centuries turned, then the hearth was its altar to invent. It was the place where families gathered, to find new, sometimes peculiar ways to keep warmth was coaxed. The medieval world may not have been comfortable, but to speak of hearths is to speak struggle against the cold was as constant as its struggle against time itself of pre-modern life as heat itself, winding its way into rafters, staining walls, clinging to clothes and hair, settling into the lungs of those who lived among it. Warmth before the coming of central heating was never pure. It was always bought at the cost of smoke. Early hearths were simple, a fire pit in the centre of a dwelling, stones arranged to contain the flames. The smoke rose straight upwards and lingered beneath the roof, slowly filtering out through a hole or louvre. In small cottages, the thatch itself often acted as a filter, catching soot until it grew heavy and black. In longhouses across northern Europe, where humans and livestock shared one roof, the fire sat squarely in the middle. The family clustered around it, their animals behind partitions at one end, all breathing in the same thick, smoky air. To modern lungs it would have been suffocating. To medieval lungs it was simply life. The arrival of the chimney changed everything, though not all at once. Chimneys are often thought of as timeless, but in truth they are a relatively late invention, spreading widely only from the 12th and 13th centuries onwards. Before then, most buildings had nothing more than an open hearth and a hole in the roof. The chimney offered a controlled escape for smoke, a channel that carried fumes away and allowed the fire itself to burn hotter and cleaner. It also made possible a fundamental shift. Instead of one great hall with a single fire, smaller rooms could now be heated individually, each with its own fireplace. This was no small change. With chimneys, privacy and warmth could coexist. Lords and ladies no longer needed to share the smoky atmosphere of the hall every hour of every day. Bedchambers could be equipped with their own fireplaces, modest though they were, offering a measure of independence from the communal blaze. Whole families might retreat to smaller spaces, their own fires crackling, their own smoke channeled neatly skyward. Yet chimneys were expensive to build and maintain. Masonry had to be precise, brickwork carefully managed, flues swept to prevent dangerous build-ups of soot. Fires remained hazardous. A stray spark could set thatch alight in an instant. Towns and cities were regularly devastated by blazes that began in the hearth. London itself suffered repeatedly, culminating in the Great Fire of 1666, which destroyed thousands of homes, many ignited by unattended or poorly managed fires. Warmth was never entirely safe. Even within homes, the chimney brought only partial relief. Smoke might be reduced, but drafts remained. Fireplaces drew in air to feed their flames, pulling cold winds through cracks and under doors. To sit by a fire was to feel warmth on one's face while icy currents nipped at the back. Heat was localized, its reach limited. A roaring fire might warm the body, but step away a few paces and the chill returned. People learned to live within these small zones of comfort, gravitating to the hearth as naturally as moths to a flame. The culture of the fireplace soon grew rich with meaning. It was not merely functional, it was symbolic. To gather at the hearth was to gather at the centre of domestic life. Stories were told in its glow, songs sung, prayers whispered. The hearth became a place of ritual. Ashes were sometimes scattered for luck. Embers might be preserved from a family fire when moving to a new home, carried in pots so that the new hearth would be kindled with the old flame. Warmth was continuity. Warmth was belonging. Yet smoke was still relentless. Even with chimneys, soot-coated walls and ceilings, stained clothing and blackened skin, the smell was inescapable, woven into the fabric of life. Chimney sweeps, often children in later centuries, clambered through narrow flues, scraping away layers of soot at immense personal risk. For every moment of comfort, there was labour, danger and grime. And still, despite the smoke, despite the dirt, the hearth remained beloved. The sight of a glowing fire in a fireplace framed by stone or carved wood was a source of reassurance. In the bleakness of winter, it was a promise. However cold the world outside here, within this circle of light, life could be endured. The crackle of logs, the flicker of flame, the dance of shadows, these were the companions of countless generations. They defined not only how people kept warm, but how they understood home itself. Think of a medieval or early modern family on a January night. The wind rattles shutters, snow lies thick upon the ground. Within, the fire is lit. A pot hangs over it, stew bubbling slowly. Children sit close, eyes half closing in the warmth. Adults mend clothes, sharpen tools, or simply stare into the flames. Above, smoke curls up into the chimney, carrying with it the memories of 1,000 similar nights. It is smoky, it is draughty, it is imperfect. Yet it is warmth. It is survival. So when we speak of chimneys and hearths, we speak of more than architecture. We speak of the meeting point of necessity and culture. We speak of the strange balance between comfort and discomfort, between heat and smoke. These were not solutions in the modern sense. They were compromises, but they were compromises that sustained generations. The rooms remained chilly, the beds icy, the mornings breath white. But thanks to hearths and chimneys, the cold could be pushed back a little. Thanks to the flames that leapt within stone frames, nights were made bearable, lives made longer, winters survived. It was never central heating, never uniform, never
Long
clean.
before anyone dreamt of a thermostat
quietly
humming
so
in the
it
background,
endured,
keeping
century
the entire
after
house
century,
evenly
until the
warm.
great revolutions
challenge
of
of bedtime
technology
was a
finally
nightly
offered
ordeal.
something more. The fire in the hearth
For now,
could comfort the
in the
living
world
space.
before radiators
But once
and
the flames
thermostats,
dwindled and
the
the
hearth
embers
was
dimmed,
king.
the house would
And in
fall
its
prey
smoky
to the
glow,
creeping
humanity
cold.
lived, walls
endured
breathed,
drafts,
and dreamed
windows
of
warmer
warmer
days,
days.
and the bedchamber became a small chamber of ice. It is here that human ingenuity took on a peculiar, almost whimsical character, producing a host of strange contraptions and rituals designed for one purpose: to make the bed a bearable place to lie down in winter. The most famous of these contraptions was the bed-warming pan. At first glance, it might have seemed a simple object, almost elegant. A broad, shallow metal pan with a long handle, often made of brass or copper, polished to a sheen. But its function was far more practical than ornamental. The pan was filled with glowing embers scooped directly from the hearth, then carried carefully up the stairs. The long handle allowed it to be swished beneath the bedclothes, moving back and forth to chase away the chill that had settled into the linen. One can imagine the hiss and faint crackle as sparks danced across the pan's surface, the sheets momentarily warming before cooling again once the pan had passed. The device, however, was not without its dangers. A single careless moment, a forgotten ember, a bed left smouldering, could ignite catastrophe. Whole homes were lost to such accidents, the warmth that had been so desperately sought turning instead to flame and ruin. Warming pans were both salvation and hazard, treated with a mixture of relief and caution. Wealthier households often had servants perform the duty, slipping upstairs before the master and mistress retired, waving the glowing pan through the bed like a sword of fire, leaving behind a faint scent of smoke and metal. For those less willing to gamble with sparks and embers, there were safer alternatives. Heated stones and bricks were a common answer. The process was simple enough. Take a sturdy brick or a rounded stone, lay it in the hearth until it glowed with heat, then wrap it in cloth or slip it into a small wooden or ceramic container. Once tucked beneath the covers, it radiated a slow, steady warmth, like a captive sun glowing in the darkness. Unlike the pan, the brick did not endanger the sheets with flame. It cooled gradually, allowing the sleeper to drift into slumber, with their toes warmed rather than frozen stiff. This practice lent itself to a kind of ritual. Before bedtime, the household might prepare their stones, wrapping them with care, passing them from hand to hand as if holding a relic of warmth. In some families, the same stones were used for generations, their surfaces blackened and smooth from years of fire. It is not difficult to picture the relief of climbing into bed, sheets stiff with cold, only to find at one's feet a brick still radiating the day's captured heat. Such small comforts became treasured luxuries. With the rise of glass-making and pottery, another refinement emerged, the hot water bottle. In its earliest form, it was not the pliable rubber container we know today, but rather a stout vessel of earthenware or metal filled with boiling water, stoppered tightly, and slipped beneath the bedclothes. Known in some places as foot warmers, these bottles were beloved for their reliability. They carried no sparks, they risked no flame, and they could be refilled each night with little fuss. Their rounded shapes fitted neatly at the bottom of the bed, a quiet sentinel of warmth through the long hours. In time, hot water bottles themselves took on social meaning. Elaborately decorated stoneware bottles were gifted between families, passed down as heirlooms, and even inscribed with patterns or mottos. They were symbols of domestic care, of a household's determination to fight back the winter chill. The poor might make do with whatever container could hold water without leaking, a tin can, a reused flask, while the wealthy could afford bottles of porcelain delicately painted, serving as much a status symbol as a source of comfort. Yet even with pans, bricks, and bottles, the cold was never entirely defeated. Beds were fortresses against the chill, layered with as many blankets, quilts, and furs as could be spared. Sometimes, warming devices were combined with elaborate canopies and heavy curtains, creating the so-called four-poster bed that trapped heat within its own small world. One climbed into such a bed much as one might enter a tent, drawing curtains shut against draughts, cocooning oneself with warmed sheets, and letting the rest of the room fade into icy darkness. In rural cottages, improvisation was common. If a family lacked metal for a pan or pottery for a bottle, they might use a simple bag of heated grain or sand. Once warmed by the hearth, the bag could be placed at the foot of the bed, radiating its gentle heat for hours. In some regions, even livestock themselves played a part. Children might fall asleep in lofts above barns, the rising body heat of animals warming the wooden floorboards beneath. To be warm was to be inventive, and the line between oddity and necessity blurred constantly. The psychology of warmth, too, mattered as much as its reality. A bed warmed with a pan or brick was more than a physical comfort. It was a promise of care. The servant who braved the embers to prepare a master's bed, the parent who wrapped the stone for a child, the partner who filled the water bottle, all were performing acts of quiet affection. To slip one's feet onto warmed linen was to know that someone had thought ahead, someone had guarded against the cold. In this sense, these odd devices carried with them a human warmth that no technology could replace. But let us not romanticize too far. There were nights when the pan scorched sheets, when the bottle leaked boiling water onto skin, when the brick cooled too soon, leaving the sleeper once again curled tight against the cold. Warmth was fleeting, imperfect, fragile. Yet it was precisely because it was fleeting that it mattered so deeply. Each ember carried upstairs, each heated stone placed at the foot of a bed, was a small victory against winter. Over the centuries, as homes grew more comfortable, these methods endured. Even in the 19th century, when coal stoves and better insulation were slowly spreading, bed-warming pans still hung by the hearth in many houses. Hot water bottles remained a fixture of domestic life well into the 20th century, cherished not merely for utility, but for their association with care and coziness. In Britain especially, the rubber bottle became a nostalgic emblem of cold nights and snug beds, its humble presence a reminder of older struggles with warmth. Thus, when we think of oddities like pans, bricks and bottles, we are really seeing a window into how people adapted, how they mixed ingenuity with tradition, how they turned nightly survival into ritual. These objects are quaint now, tucked away in antique shops or museum cases, but once they were vital, even magical. They turned icy beds into havens. They had allowed bodies to rest, to dream, to wake with the strength to face another day of frost. The story of bed-warming devices is the story of compromise. The cold does not
Never
only
perfect,
creep into houses
often
and
risky,
beds,
always necessary.
it follows us everywhere. They reveal to us how people of the past confronted the same sensation
in
we
an
know
age
too
before
well.
central heating
The
or
shiver that
insulated
runs through the
walls
body when
was
cold
to enter a
seeps into the
battlefield
bones,
against air itself.
and how they met it with
There was
fire,
no true escape
stone,
from it,
water
only
and care.
armour.
Only layers. The central heating
Clothing
of
was
today
not
may render
fashioned
such
first,
contraptions
it was
obsolete,
survival.
but their
The
memory
body
became
lingers,
a furnace, warming
and the
history
garments we
itself with
wrapped around
tales
it
of
were meant to hold
ingenuity
the
and
fire
devotion.
in.
The struggle for warmth gave rise to wardrobes heavy and strange, practical and ingenious, each layer an attempt to trap one more pocket of heat. Long before anyone spoke of winter collections or seasonal trends, people knew the art of layering. The innermost garment was always the first defence. In medieval Europe, this meant the linen shirt or chemise, a simple tunic worn next to the skin. Linen surprisingly offered comfort even in the cold. Though thin, it wicked away moisture, preventing sweat from chilling the body. Over this base came wool, the undisputed king of warmth. Wool trapped air within its fibres, turning even a modest cloak into a shield against icy wind. The poor, who could not afford finely spun cloth, often wore coarse homespun wool, rough to the touch but dense enough to hold warmth. In the absence of wool, they made do with whatever could be woven: flax, hemp, even nettle fibres. The principle was the same everywhere: more layers, more trapped air, more warmth. A peasant might wear 3 or 4 tunics in winter, each patched and worn until their body was swallowed in fabric. The weight itself became part of the experience of winter, a heaviness that pressed on the shoulders, that slowed the body, but also protected it from the bite of the cold. Among the wealthy, the art of layering became both a necessity and a display of status. A noble might don a fine linen shirt, then a padded doublet, then a fur-lined robe, and finally a cloak of velvet trimmed with ermine. Each layer served not only to insulate but also to announce wealth. Exotic furs, sable, mink, lynx were more than mere protection. They were symbols of power, carried from the frozen forests of the north into the courts of Europe. To wrap oneself in fur was to say, I have tamed the wild and made it serve me. Yet beneath the display, the purpose was as old as time: to stay warm. In Asia, similar principles shaped clothing. In China, padded garments called mian ao were filled with cotton or silk floss, creating quilts one could wear. These layers turned the body into a mobile bed, swaddled against the cold. In Japan, the hanten and kairagi coats of quilted cotton became winter staples, their thick layers of batting trapping warmth while still allowing movement. The genius of these designs lay in their simplicity. The body's heat, once captured, was not easily lost. People across continents discovered the same truth again and again, that layering was the surest defence against winter's teeth. Even undergarments held significance. In colder regions of Europe, knitted stockings became prized possessions. They hugged the legs, sealing warmth where long gowns left drafts. By the 16th century, stockings of wool or silk were pulled high and tied at the knee, often worn in pairs for double insulation. To lack proper legwear in winter was to invite misery, for the cold always sought the extremities first: the toes, the fingers, the ears. People answered by swaddling themselves, binding cloth upon cloth until the body resembled a bundle more than a figure. And then there were hands and heads. Gloves, mittens, and caps were not luxuries, they were lifelines. In Scandinavia, mittens of felted wool kept fingers alive in the frozen air. In Russia, the Ushanka hat, with its flaps tied down over ears, became iconic precisely because ears were so easily lost to frost. In England, knitted wool caps, known as Monmouth caps, warmed sailors and soldiers alike. A bare head in winter was more than uncomfortable. It was dangerous. Mothers and grandmothers across centuries repeated the same advice. Keep your head covered. Keep your ears warm. Clothing also carried with it the scent of the home. Garments were hung by the fire, absorbing smoke, the faint aroma of peat or wood clinging to them. To put on such clothing was to carry the hearth outside, a memory of warmth held close even as one faced the snow. In some traditions, herbs were sewn into layers. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, both for fragrance and for the belief that their oils offered protection against chill and illness. Thus, warmth became not only a physical shield, but a kind of charm, a defence woven into fabric by hand and hope. Children especially were bundled with almost comical care. Accounts from colonial America describe infants swaddled so tightly in layers of wool and linen that they resembled small packages more than babies. Mobility was sacrificed for insulation. The goal was simple: to keep the spark of life burning in the most fragile bodies during long, freezing nights. Parents knew the danger too well. Cold claimed the young quickly. Every stitch of fabric was a guardian against loss. But layers had their cost. To dress for true winter was to burden oneself. A traveller in the 17th century might wear 3 cloaks, 2 pairs of stockings, several shirts, and still shiver beneath the sky. Movement grew stiff. Sweat gathered beneath heavy layers, and once dampness set in, the cold could return with greater cruelty. People learned to strike a balance, to change layers as conditions shifted, to hang garments near fires to dry before putting them back on. Clothing was a living system, always adjusted, always negotiated. The ingenuity of layers also extended to communal life. In colder villages, households would share garments. A heavy fur cloak might be passed between family members depending on who braved the outdoors. In the Scottish Highlands, the great plaid, a massive length of woolen cloth, served both as daytime clothing and nighttime blanket. Worn by day, it wrapped the body in folds of fabric. By night, it unfolded to cover the sleeper. Clothing was not fixed to one function. It adapted, stretched, transformed to meet the demands of survival. And then there were rituals of dressing. Winter mornings were slow battles. To climb from a cold bed into colder air, then layer garment after garment, was itself a trial. Fingers numbed before the task was done, shoes stiffened overnight with frost needing to be thawed before feet could enter. Yet once the layers were finally arranged, once cloaks and gloves and hoods were tied, the body became something new, armoured, ready to face a world that would otherwise wound it. It is easy, in our time of lightweight jackets and insulated fabrics, to forget how heavy warmth once felt. To walk down a winter street centuries ago was to hear the rustle of wool, the swish of cloaks, the creak of leather boots stiff with cold. People moved like bundles, their faces hidden beneath hoods and scarves. Identity itself was softened by winter, swallowed beneath layer upon layer. One could hardly tell neighbour from stranger beneath the mountain of cloth. Yet in this shared struggle, there was community, the silent fellowship of all who braved the same cold winds. Clothing, in the end, was the most personal form of heat. Unlike bed-warming pans or blazing hearths, it travelled with you. It wrapped itself around your skin, it bore the imprint of your body, it carried your scent and your story. A cloak could be patched 100 times, its wool thinning, its edges fraying, yet still it served. Still it guarded its wearer. When it comes to surviving winter before central heating, the fire and the hearth and layers of clothing were only part of the battle. Close, woven into every step of daily life, flowed through the body itself. People built their defences. Humans discovered early that warmth could be carried from the inside out. That certain beverages, spices, and food could stoke the internal furnace. They told a story of adaptation, comfort, of resilience. In a world where drafty halls and frozen nights were inevitable, hot drinks were a portable, internal solution to a problem that fire and clothing could only partly solve. Consider first the humble hot drink. Long before the invention of modern teapots or kettles, people learned to boil water or milk over a fire and consume it slowly, letting its heat seep into the core of the body. In medieval Europe, ale was often served warm in winter. spiced with cinnamon, cloves, or nutmeg to add both flavour and a sensation of heat. These were not merely luxuries. The alcohol in ale produced warmth by dilating blood vessels, while the spices created a tingling internal fire that made the body feel alive against the cold. Tea, coffee, and chocolate would come later, brought from distant lands by traders and colonists, but they followed the same principle. A hot infusion, carefully brewed, could transform a shivering morning into something manageable. Tea, arriving in England in the 17th century, became particularly beloved for this reason. A cup of boiled water over dried leaves steeped carefully offered both warmth and ritual. Coffee houses, emerging in urban centres, were as much refugees from winter as they were spaces of social gathering. Patrons would huddle over steaming mugs, sharing conversation, news, and the comfort of internal heat. Hot chocolate, too, held a special place. Imported from the Americas as a bitter, spicy drink, it was mixed with sugar, milk, and sometimes cinnamon to create a warming elixir. In Spain, Italy, and France, it became synonymous with winter indulgence. Unlike fire-warmed hearths that heated only the room or blankets that insulated the skin, hot beverages went straight to the core. Every sip spread warmth through the stomach and chest, radiating outward to limbs and extremities. In a world where hands and feet often froze, this internal fire was precious indeed. Spices themselves were considered powerful allies in the fight against cold. Cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, and pepper were all believed to raise the body's temperature, stimulate circulation, and preserve vitality in winter. In medieval medicine, these properties were understood in the language of humours. Warmth countered cold, moisture countered dryness. Meals were often prepared with spices in winter not simply for taste, but for their supposed medicinal warmth. Wealthy households, able to afford imported spices, layered them into soups, stews, and porridges, transforming ordinary sustenance into both nourishment and protection against frost. Even simple sugar had its role. Though expensive, sugar was often used to create sweet cordials and beverages that made the mouth tingle and the body respond. Combined with hot liquids or spiced wine, it produced an almost magical sense of heat. Children and adults alike savoured such drinks not merely as indulgence but as an essential part of surviving the cold months. A cup of warm, spiced liquid could lift the spirit as well as the body, turning icy misery into comfort and ritual. Alcoholic drinks were also central. Beer and wine were consumed hot, sometimes mulled with honey and spices. Hot wine, mulled, spiced, and sweetened, became a staple of winter feasts across Europe, from England to the Germanic lands. Its effect was immediate. The warmth spread through the chest, fingers, and toes, and the body felt temporarily insulated against frost. As with other internal methods, it was not a permanent solution. Once the alcohol wore off, the chill returned. But for a few hours, the fire burned within, and that was often enough to endure the night or a long journey. The preparation of these drinks was a ritual in itself. Pots were kept over embers, kettles hung from hooks above the fire, spices ground and measured with care. In some households, the same family members who tended the hearth also brewed the beverages, carrying the heat from fire to liquid to body. Cups, mugs, and bowls were sometimes warmed beforehand, ensuring that no precious heat was lost on contact. Even the act of drinking, and slow, deliberate, mindful, became part of the process of internal insulation. Foods played a similar role. Thick soups, stews, porridges, and broths, all consumed hot, provided calories and warmth. Fatty meats, roasted root vegetables, and grains ensured the body could maintain internal heat. In the bitterest climates, people ate more in winter precisely because digestion itself generates warmth. Hot food, like hot drinks, was a means of fighting cold from within, a mobile and immediate solution to a problem that external measures could only partly address. Some cultures developed particularly ingenious combinations of food and spice. In India, for example, winter kitchens prepared masalas and stews rich in ginger, cardamom, and pepper, combining heat from the spice with the caloric energy of rice or lentils. In Scandinavia, spiced mulled ale accompanied hearty fish or meat dishes, each element reinforcing warmth in body and spirit. Across continents, the same principle emerged. Internal heat, fueled by careful consumption, complemented the external measures of clothing and fire. Even in England, where winters could be damp and bone-chilling, the tradition of hot drinks and spiced wines became entrenched. Taverns served mulled ale to travellers returning from the cold, while households kept kettles simmering over the hearth throughout the day. Children were given warm milk with honey, adults sipped spiced cider, and everyone relied on the same fundamental understanding. Warmth must be generated, captured and distributed not only outside but within. It is fascinating to note that these internal methods were, in some ways, egalitarian. While luxurious furs or elaborate layers of clothing were available only to the wealthy, hot drinks, soups, and spice meals could be made in modest households. A simple broth or tea warmed the poorest worker returning from the fields, offering a measure of comfort otherwise unattainable. Internal warmth, then, was not only a technological or material achievement, it was a social equalizer, a personal furnace that each could light for themselves. Ritual, too, played a role. Families gathered in kitchens or by smaller fires, sipping together, sharing the heat that flowed from cup to chest. The social aspect enhanced the warmth. Conversation, laughter, and even singing contributed to a psychological feeling of heat. The mind, attuned to communal comfort, responded to body warmth with reassurance, creating a subtle but real effect, shared heat, both literal and emotional, against the long, dark months. And so, in the era before central heating, humans relied upon these ingenious and simple methods: hot drinks, spiced foods, and careful nutrition. They understood that warmth was not only external in hearths and blankets, but internal, a force generated, preserved, and cherished. It was personal, communal, and cultural, a practice repeated year after year, generation after generation. Each sip, each mouthful, each measure of spice was a small triumph against frost, a statement of human adaptability and perseverance. Even today, the echoes of these traditions remain. We drink hot tea on a cold morning, sip mulled cider during winter festivals, wrap ourselves in hot chocolate after a day in the snow. The science is the same. Internal heat fights external cold. What was once necessity is now comfort. Warmth was not simply something created or worn, and for centuries it was also something quiet, shared. Portable warmth long allowed humans to survive winters that might otherwise have been unbearable. Made solitude in the cold a dangerous life before the invention of modern heating systems. People discovered early that the human body itself was a source of heat, and that sleeping together was an efficient, if sometimes surprising, way to preserve it. Communal sleeping, from crowded cottages to large family bedrooms, was both practical and, in many cultures, a deeply ingrained part of life. In Northern Europe, where winters were long and harsh, it was common for entire families to share a single sleeping space. Children, parents, and sometimes grandparents huddled together in one room, their bodies pressed close to conserve warmth. Beds were often smaller than we are accustomed to today, so warmth required proximity. Even the poor, who could not afford multiple beds or heavy blankets, discovered that the collective body heat of several people under one roof could make the difference between enduring the night and succumbing to the cold. This practice was not limited to the lower classes. Nobility too engaged in communal sleeping, though in more segregated forms. Children might share rooms with siblings or attendants, while adults occupied larger chambers where servants slept in corners or on benches nearby. The principle remained the same. Bodies close together reduced heat loss. The number of blankets and furs might be luxurious, but human warmth was the most immediate and reliable source of comfort. Even in medieval inns and hostels, where strangers were lodged together, communal sleeping was a matter of survival. Beds might be shared or lined up in long rows, with bodies pressed close under blankets and straw-filled mattresses. Travellers, arriving after a day exposed to wind, rain, or snow, relied upon the heat of others to make the night tolerable. Such arrangements were rarely private, rarely comfortable in the modern sense, but they were effective. The practice extended beyond the bedroom. In rural households, people would gather around hearths to sleep near the fire's residual heat, sometimes on benches or mats laid on the floor. Animals too played a role. In many longhouses, pigs, cows, and sheep were kept within the same roof as the family. The rising body heat from these animals created an additional layer of warmth, and children in particular often slept in lofts or alcoves directly above the livestock, benefiting from the natural radiator below. Cultural variations of communal sleeping were rich and fascinating. In Japan, for instance, futons were laid side by side on tatami mats, allowing families to share warmth while sleeping in a relatively minimal space. In Scandinavia, families might cluster on benches or straw-filled mattresses, sometimes curling tightly together, conserving every ounce of body heat. In Mongolia and the steppes, yurts offered small communal sleeping areas where multiple family members and even guests huddled together during bitter winters. Across cultures, the principle was universal. Shared warmth was survival. Historical accounts frequently emphasize the ingenuity of sleeping arrangements. Families would rotate positions during the night to ensure that the coldest or weakest members remained closest to the center of heat. In large households, children might be layered on top of or between adults to benefit from maximal warmth. Blankets and furs were strategically arranged, creating pockets of insulation. Even small adjustments, such as placing boards beneath straw mattresses or raising beds off cold floors, were combined with human warmth to create more tolerable conditions. Communal sleeping also fostered social bonds. Beyond its practical function, sharing a bed or room was a demonstration of care, trust, and intimacy. Parents cradled children close, reinforcing familial ties. Siblings huddled together, whispering and laughing in the dark, finding comfort not just in body heat but in companionship. Even among strangers in inns or longhouses, the arrangement encouraged cooperation and vigilance. Bodies pressed close together meant fewer drafts, but also collective awareness of danger, whether from fire, intruders, or frostbite. Of course, communal sleeping had its challenges. Privacy was minimal, and bodies pressed together could become overheated, as well as cold. Illness spread easily, since colds and infections moved swiftly in close quarters. Noise, fidgeting, and even snoring were unavoidable consequences of proximity. Yet the necessity of warmth outweighed these drawbacks. Survival was a higher priority than comfort or personal space. In some historical contexts, communal sleeping extended beyond the family unit entirely. Military barracks, apprenticeships, and monastic orders all relied on shared sleeping arrangements to conserve heat. Soldiers in winter campaigns slept shoulder to shoulder, sometimes in trenches or tents, relying on the collective body heat to withstand frost. Monks in European monasteries, particularly in colder climates, shared dormitories that were deliberately designed to keep heat concentrated in one space. In each case, communal warmth was a tool of endurance, a practical solution to environmental hardship. Interestingly, the body heat of animals was often combined with communal sleeping for humans. Cats, dogs, and smaller livestock were common companions in bedrooms, particularly in rural areas. Cats curled at the foot of the bed, dogs slept near the doorway, and even chickens or ducks were occasionally kept close to provide a small, consistent source of warmth. Such arrangements were practical, economical, and deeply embedded in household tradition. The human-animal warmth cycle was an early form of energy conservation, a way to maximize heat without burning additional fuel. Clothing and bedding complemented communal sleeping in essential ways. Layers of wool, linen, and fur were shared as needed. Blankets might be passed from one bed to another, or furs laid on benches for added insulation. People learned to overlap bedding and clothing strategically. The center of the bed, where the most bodies gathered, became the warmest spot, while edges near walls or windows remained coldest. Families developed subtle codes of warmth management, unspoken understandings of who took which position, which blanket covered whom, and how to adjust during the night to maintain comfort for all. Even with these arrangements, winter nights were often harsh. Cold still crept into toes, fingers, and noses. Windows, thin or cracked, admitted icy drafts. Roofs leaked snow or rain. Communal sleeping was not perfect. It was, however, one of the most effective strategies available, supplementing fires, clothing, and hot drinks. Without the heat of bodies pressed together, survival in colder regions would have been significantly more difficult. Communal sleeping also influenced social structures and daily routines. Families who slept together often woke together, ate together, and moved through the day in rhythm with one another. Nighttime proximity reinforced daytime cooperation. This pattern was evident in rural economies, where harvest, herding, and household tasks demanded coordinated activity, and in urban households, where multiple generations might share small rooms or lofts. Heat was not just physical, it shaped the way people lived, worked, and related to one another. And so, centuries before central heating, humans discovered that warmth was as much social as technological. The fire could only go so far, blankets only so thick, hot drinks only so far into the extremities. The ultimate source of comfort often lay in one another, in bodies pressed together, hearts beating in rhythm, breaths warming the air of the chamber. Communal sleeping was an act of both necessity and intimacy, a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity in the face of cold. It is remarkable to consider the universality of this practice. Across continents, climates, and cultures, people converged on the same solution: to survive winter, share warmth. It was practical, yes, but it was also profoundly human. The body itself became a furnace, extended outward to embrace family, friends, and even animals. In doing so, warmth became both personal and communal, physical and emotional, a tool of survival, and a reinforcement of social bonds. In the absence of modern heating, communal sleeping demonstrates how human beings have always combined ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptability. It is a reminder that warmth was not only created, but carried, shared, and managed. Before the invention of central heating, the fireplace was the heart of every home. The cold remained relentless. It was more than a place to cook or to gather. Together, humans transformed vulnerability into strength, shaping the architecture of the house itself. And winter nights into bearable, positioning, size, and construction of the hearth were all deliberate, reflecting both practical needs and aesthetic sensibilities. Long winters demanded it, and households of every class relied upon it to stave off the creeping cold. Early fireplaces were simple openings in stone or brick walls, their chimneys rudimentary at best. Smoke often filled the room before it found its way outside, and heat was unevenly distributed. Yet even in this primitive form, the hearth served its essential function, a concentrated source of warmth. Families would arrange furniture and sleeping areas around it, ensuring that each person could benefit from the radiating heat. The hearth became a social centre, a focal point around which life revolved during the colder months. In wealthier homes, fireplaces became grander and more sophisticated. Large stone mantels, ornate carvings, and wide hearths were both practical and decorative. The size of the opening allowed more wood to burn, producing stronger, longer-lasting heat. Chimneys were carefully engineered to draw smoke away efficiently, a science born of trial, error, and observation over centuries. In castles and manor houses, massive fireplaces dominated halls and chambers, their roaring fires providing comfort even when the wind howled through unglazed windows. Architecture itself adapted to warmth. Rooms were designed to maximize the effect of the hearth. Low ceilings helped trap heat, while thick walls prevented cold from seeping in. Windows were small or shuttered during the winter, minimizing drafts. Floors were often raised or layered with rushes and carpets to prevent cold from radiating upward. In this way, the fireplace did not operate in isolation. It was part of a broader system of architectural strategies designed to contain, concentrate, and distribute heat. In cottages and rural homes, fireplaces were the centre of domestic life in an equally vital but less ornate way. The hearth was large enough to cook meals and boil water, but also provided warmth for the household. Benches, chairs, and sleeping areas were arranged to capture the heat, and hearthstones themselves were sometimes used as beds or seating during the day. Every household member learned to orient themselves with the warmth, moving closer or further away depending on comfort. In this sense, architecture was human scale, designed to accommodate both bodies and heat. Fireplace design also adapted to the available fuel. In areas with abundant wood, our open hearths burned logs, creating both light and heat. In coal-rich regions, hearths were designed to contain glowing embers and allow for controlled burning of mineral fuel. In both cases, the fireplace became a tool not only of warmth but of energy management, capable of sustaining heat over hours or even an entire night. The size, shape, and material of the hearth all contributed to its efficiency. Chimneys evolved as a critical component. Early homes sometimes lacked chimneys altogether, allowing smoke to drift upwards through thatched roofs or simple flues. The invention and spread of vertical chimneys transformed domestic heating. Smoke could be safely carried away, while heat remained concentrated in the room. Multiple fireplaces could be connected through complex chimney networks, allowing a single fuel source to provide warmth to several rooms. This development marked a turning point in architectural heating, making interiors more comfortable and safer. Fireplaces were also adapted with domestic tools and accessories to enhance their effectiveness. Andirons, grates, and firebacks helped control the fire, protect the hearth, and reflect heat into the room. Copper and iron firebacks, sometimes engraved or decorated, retained heat and radiated it slowly, providing long-lasting warmth long after the flames had dimmed. Screens prevented sparks from flying into rooms, while tools like pokers and tongs allowed careful adjustment of logs and embers. Every element served both function and longevity, demonstrating the importance of craftsmanship in maintaining comfort. In addition to practical measures, the fireplace shaped social behaviour. Families gathered around it not only to stay warm but to engage in conversation, storytelling, and domestic labour. Knitting, sewing, reading, and mending were all performed near the hearth. Children played within reach of the heat, while adults cooked, cleaned, and managed household affairs. The spatial arrangement of rooms, furniture, and hearths reinforced patterns of life dictated by the need for warmth. Social rhythms were guided by the glow of embers. Seasonal adjustments were common. Firewood was stockpiled for months in advance, often in dedicated sheds or storage areas near the hearth. The type of wood mattered. Hardwoods burned longer and hotter, while softer woods were used for quick fires or kindling. Coal, when available, required different management as it burned more consistently, but also produced toxic gases if ventilation was inadequate. Households developed expertise in fuel selection, fire maintenance, and heat distribution, skills passed down through generations. Fireplaces were also central to health and well-being. Smoke, drafts, and uneven heat were hazards, but carefully managed fires provided protection against cold-related illness. Warmth from the hearth prevented hypothermia, relieved muscle stiffness, and allowed the body to recover overnight. In rural or poorly insulated homes, the difference between life and death in winter often depended on the hearth's fire. It was a lifeline, a daily labour, and a domestic treasure. Beyond function, fireplaces were symbolic. They represented the heart of the home, a place where family, warmth, and sustenance converged. They were often elaborately decorated to convey wealth or status, serving as both practical installations and cultural markers. In inns, taverns, and manor houses, the hearth was a centre of hospitality, offering heat to guests as well as owners. Across social classes, the fireplace remained a key element in the architecture of survival, comfort, and communal life. And yet, even the largest fireplace had limits. Rooms far from the hearth remained cold, night air seeped through cracks, and heat could not reach the uppermost ceilings. People supplemented the hearth with all manner of strategies: bed-warming pans, layered clothing, hot drinks, and communal sleeping. The fireplace was central, but it was only one element in a complex system of heat management, requiring ingenuity, attention, and human adaptation. Through centuries, the design of fireplaces continued to evolve. From simple open pits to ornate stone hearths and iron grates, each innovation reflected a desire to maximize warmth, safety, and comfort. Chimneys, firebacks, and accessories turned fire into a controlled, reliable source of heat. Architecture adapted around it. Rooms, furniture, and daily routines coordinated to capture its benefits. The fireplace was both a technological solution and a cultural institution, shaping how humans survived, socialized, and celebrated winter. In the end, the fireplace exemplifies the ingenuity of pre-central heating life. It was at once functional, social, and symbolic, a microcosm of human adaptation to cold. The glow of embers, the smell of smoke, the careful stacking of logs. Even the grandest fireplace, the heaviest cloak, and the thickest blankets could not fully defend against winter if the cold found its way through doors and windows. Frost. Long before central remained central to warmth, providing not just heat, but also rhythm, ritual, and comfort in a world that demanded it. For the wind and frost could slip inside unnoticed, chilling skin and bone alike. The art of sealing a house against the cold became as important as the fireplace itself, a quiet battle waged along thresholds, shutters, and wooden frames. In rural cottages, doors were often made of heavy, thick planks, sometimes reinforced with iron bands or crossbars. Yet even the stoutest door could let in wind through tiny gaps at the top, sides, or bottom. People learned to use improviso's methods to block these leaks. Straw, rags, moss, or cloth were stuffed into cracks, forming rudimentary draft stoppers. Some households built wooden panels that could be pressed against doors from the inside, creating a more permanent seal during the coldest months. These solutions were simple, resourceful, and repeated in every household that braved harsh winters. Windows posed a similar challenge. Glass was rare and expensive for much of history, and even when available, it often left gaps or thin panes that could not retain warmth. Early settlers in northern Europe and colonial America frequently relied on oiled paper, horn, or cloth stretched across wooden frames to keep out drafts. Waxed paper, parchment, and later mica were used as semi-transparent substitutes, allowing light without inviting the full force of the cold inside. The ingenuity lay in recognizing that even a thin barrier was better than none, and that heat could be trapped more effectively with careful layering. Shutters were an essential companion to windows. Wooden shutters, hinged or sliding, could be closed tightly at night or during storms, blocking wind and snow. In some regions, shutters were lined with cloth or paper to add extra insulation. Tying curtains or blankets across the inside of windows became a common practice, a domestic solution that combined aesthetics with function. By day, they could be drawn to allow light and warmth from the sun to enter. By night, they trapped the body heat accumulated within, creating a warmer interior environment. Thresholds at the bottom of doors were particularly vulnerable. The cold often swept under them, chilling floors and feet. To combat this, households devised draft excluders, simple rolls of cloth, sometimes filled with straw, sand, or moss, placed along the sill. They could be moved or lifted easily, but provided an immediate barrier against incoming cold air. Such innovations were small but effective, a testament to practical domestic knowledge passed down over generations. Floors themselves were considered in insulation strategies. In many homes, especially cottages, floors were simply packed earth, which drew warmth from the room above very poorly. To reduce the effect of cold rising through the ground, people layered rushes, straw, or carpets across sleeping and working areas. In wealthier households, wooden floors were sometimes raised slightly, creating a cavity that reduced drafts and allowed for some insulation beneath. Even the placement of beds on raised platforms reflected an understanding that heat rises and cold sinks, a basic principle applied creatively long before modern physics explained it. Doors and windows were also managed in relation to human activity. Families learned to close doors to unused rooms, concentrating heat where it was most needed. Shutters were lowered in the early evening, and hearths positioned to radiate warmth toward occupied areas. In larger houses, corridors and staircases were sometimes blocked off with temporary partitions to prevent drafts from travelling through the building. Each of these measures reflects a conscious and consistent attempt to make interiors survivable during long, icy winters. In addition to physical barriers, textiles played a key role. Thick curtains, hung not only for decoration but for insulation, created layers of trapped air between the cold exterior and the warm interior. Tapestries familiar in castles and manor houses performed the same function, muffling drafts and retaining warmth. Even tablecloths or wall hangings were strategically positioned to intercept cold currents. Households, regardless of wealth, understood that fabric was as vital to heat management as wood or stone. In some regions, double doors were employed, creating a small vestibule that could trap cold air before it entered the main living area. This early form of an airlock meant that the door could be opened without immediately losing the warmth inside. Similarly, windows might feature shutters, curtains, and secondary layers of covering to create pockets of insulation. Every little measure counted, for even a minor breeze could compromise the comfort of a room heated by fire alone. Historical accounts reveal the creativity involved. In New England, colonists hung heavy quilts over doorways to reduce drafts. In England, straw or moss was jammed into cracks at window frames. In Scandinavia, carved wooden panels and thick curtains served a dual role of decoration and insulation. These strategies were part of domestic wisdom, learned through observation, necessity, and trial and error, passed down as much by demonstration as by instruction. The psychological dimension of draft control was also significant. People associated cold air creeping in under doors or around windows with discomfort and danger. Drafts were not merely unpleasant, they threatened health, especially among children, the elderly, and the infirm. Measures to block cold were therefore both pragmatic and preventative. Success in this area could mean a more restful night, healthier inhabitants, and a greater sense of control over an environment that was otherwise at the mercy of weather. In urban settings, similar principles applied. Houses packed closely together in cold northern towns were prone to drafts through ill-fitting doors and windows. Tenements and apartments with shared walls and common stairwells required careful attention to thresholds and coverings. Carpets, tapestries, shutters, and draft excluders were essential tools. Residents developed intricate routines, closing shutters at dusk, placing textiles strategically, adjusting doors to minimize airflow. Even the simplest urban dwelling relied on these thoughtful, often improvised strategies to manage cold. The importance of such attention cannot be overstated. Before the advent of modern heating systems, the smallest gap could undo hours of careful layering, hearth placement, and hot drinks. Every crack, every open shutter, every leaky door allowed cold to intrude, sapping body heat and challenging endurance. Families learned vigilance, checking doors and windows daily, adapting coverings as weather shifted. The home itself became a system of barriers, each element coordinated to retain warmth as effectively as possible. And so the battle against winter was fought on many fronts. Clothing, fire, hot drinks, shared sleeping arrangements, all were crucial. Yet if the cold found entry through doors or windows, the effectiveness of these other strategies could be diminished. Drafts and thin glass were subtle enemies, invisible but powerful, and domestic ingenuity rose to meet them. Through simple materials, clever placement, and constant vigilance, people learned to create spaces that were survivable, comfortable, and even inviting despite the harshness outside. In retrospect, these efforts seem almost architectural in their sophistication. Humans understood airflow, insulation, and spatial arrangement intuitively long before these concepts were formally defined. Drafts were mapped, gaps filled, coverings layered, and floors insulated. Every adjustment increased warmth, conserved fuel, and protected life. It was a quiet, unglamorous, yet vital part of daily winter survival. Thus, the story of doors, windows, and insulation reminds us that warmth has always been more than a matter of fire or clothing alone. It has required foresight, skill, and persistence. It has required observing nature, understanding materials, and improvising with whatever is at hand. Even with fireplaces blazing and windows tightly shuttered, visible frost, nights could remain, and the strategies developed to block it are a testament to human resourcefulness, but bodies still suffered from frozen toes, the instinct for comfort and survival. Long before central heating, humans developed ingenious devices to carry warmth directly to the parts of the body most vulnerable to frost. Bed warmers, foot stoves, and heated bricks were practical inventions, personal furnaces that could be placed exactly where heat was needed, transforming uncomfortable nights into tolerable, even cozy experiences. The bed warmer was perhaps the most famous of these tools. Typically a metal pan, often made of brass or copper, with a long wooden handle, it was filled with hot embers or coals from the hearth. Before retiring for the night, the pan was carefully slid beneath the sheets, moving it from foot to head to heat the bed evenly. Households exercised caution, of course. Embers could be dangerous, and bedding flammable. Yet handled correctly, the bed warmer transformed a cold mattress into a toasty haven, allowing sleep to be both possible and restorative in frigid conditions. Variations of the bed warmer existed across Europe. In England, ornate brass pans were popular among wealthier families, often decorated with patterns or family crests. In Germany, wooden boxes containing heated stones or bricks achieved the same effect, while in Scandinavia, bed warmers were sometimes filled with hot sand. The principle was universal. Concentrate a heat source close to the body, then remove it once the bedding retained warmth. Each culture adapted the technology to its available materials, resources, and safety considerations, demonstrating creativity born of necessity. Foot stoves were another widespread innovation. These were small, portable boxes or baskets, often made of metal or wood, containing burning charcoal or heated stones. Placed under a table or near the feet of a seated person, they provided a direct, localized source of warmth. In taverns, churches, and homes alike, foot stoves were prized. Patrons could slide their feet inside or rest them on the heated surface, keeping toes from freezing during long services, meals, or evenings spent spinning yarn and sewing. The foot stove combined practicality with social awareness, as its portability allowed heat to be shared among family members or friends. Heated bricks were simpler yet equally effective. Stones or bricks were warmed in the hearth and then wrapped in cloth before being placed near the body. They could sit in beds, beneath blankets, or at the foot of chairs. The stones retained heat for hours, gradually releasing it and creating a low, steady warmth. In rural homes where coal or wood was scarce, these heated bricks represented a practical, low-cost solution. Families learned the correct materials and sizes, ensuring the stones retained heat without cracking or causing burns, a subtle craft passed down through domestic instruction. The combination of these portable heat devices with other winter strategies illustrates the adaptability of human ingenuity. Clothing and blankets trapped and preserved heat, fireplaces radiated warmth throughout the room, and hot drinks stoked the body from within. Yet the extremities, hands, feet, and the coldest parts of the body often required targeted attention. Bed warmers, foot stoves, and heated bricks provided that precision. They complemented general warmth measures, ensuring that even the edges of human comfort could be reached in the harshest conditions. The social dimension of these devices was also notable. In households, a foot stove might be shared among children or between spouses, a silent demonstration of care and attention. Bed warmers required preparation, typically by a family member tasked with tending to the hearth, distributing warmth before sleep. Heated bricks could be placed strategically for the sick or elderly, demonstrating not just practicality, but also empathy. Heat became both utility and intimate gesture, a tangible manifestation of human concern for one another during the coldest nights. Safety remained a key consideration. Metal pans with live embers could ignite bedding. Foot stoves emitted smoke or gas if not properly managed. Families developed precise routines to mitigate risk. Embers were wrapped in cloth, coals carefully controlled, and devices placed on non-flammable surfaces. In wealthier households, ornate designs sometimes incorporated safety features, such as perforated covers for foot stoves or double-layered pans for bed warmers. This balance between warmth and caution underscores the sophistication of domestic heat management long before the modern era. Portable heat devices were particularly important in smaller or multi-purpose rooms. Houses in colder climates often lacked multiple fireplaces. The rooms had to serve as kitchens, living spaces, and sleeping quarters. Bed warmers or heated bricks allowed heat to be transported where it was most needed, a flexible solution that compensated for architectural limitations. Similarly, foot stoves enabled seated work, whether spinning, weaving, or writing, without requiring the entire room to be heated to uncomfortable levels. In effect, portable heat allowed humans to manage microclimates within the home, focusing warmth where it mattered most. In inns, taverns, and churches, these devices also served communal needs. Travellers could borrow foot stoves or heated bricks, ensuring that even those far from home experienced relief from cold. Shared use required coordination and trust, and often became part of the social culture of winter. Stories from historical records describe patrons huddling over a single stove or arranging heated bricks beneath blankets in crowded dormitories. Heat became a shared resource, exchanged, rotated, and managed, reflecting both the practicality and humanity of these pre-modern strategies. Even the design of these devices demonstrated ingenuity. Foot stoves often included vents to control airflow and regulate temperature, while bed warmers sometimes had perforated tops to distribute heat evenly. Heated bricks were carefully sized and shaped to retain warmth without cracking. The combination of materials, design, and method of use reflects centuries of accumulated domestic knowledge, illustrating that heat management was as much craft as convenience. Each device, though simple in appearance, represents careful thought about physics, materials, and human comfort. The continued use of these strategies into the 18th and 19th centuries demonstrates their effectiveness. Despite advances in construction and the introduction of more sophisticated fireplaces, portable heat remained essential in many homes. Even wealthy households relied on bed warmers and foot stoves, not merely out of necessity, but because they provided immediate personal warmth that larger systems could not replicate. The principle was clear. Targeted, portable heat complemented general strategies, enhancing comfort and ensuring survival. Ultimately, bed warmers, foot stoves, and heated bricks exemplify the human capacity to innovate in the face of environmental challenges. They are reminders that warmth was once hard-won, requiring preparation, skill, and creativity. The ability to carry heat, to place it exactly where needed, transformed the experience of winter. It made nights bearable, bodies safe, and sleep possible. Before the age of central heating, every surface of the home devices were essential in the battle against winter's chill. Effective, while fireplaces, portable heat, and layered clothing kept careful observation and adaptation. Walls themselves could either trap or dissipate heat. Across centuries and cultures, humans discovered ingenious ways to manipulate surfaces, using reflective materials, tapestries, and wall coverings to conserve warmth, manage drafts, and enhance comfort in even the coldest months. These strategies, both aesthetic and functional, transformed interiors into microclimates carefully tuned to human survival. One of the simplest yet most effective methods involved reflective surfaces behind the fireplace. Early hearths, particularly in Europe, often incorporated metal plates or firebacks made of iron or copper. These surfaces absorbed heat from the fire and radiated it back into the room, extending the reach of the flames and warming walls that would otherwise remain cold. In wealthier households, firebacks were decorated with intricate designs or inscriptions, serving both practical and artistic purposes. Even the patterning of the metal contributed subtly to heat distribution, a reminder that warmth and beauty were not mutually exclusive. Tapestries and fabric wall coverings were another crucial innovation. In castles and manor houses, thick woven tapestries were hung across walls not only to display wealth and taste, but to serve as insulation. Cold stone walls, notorious for leaching heat, could be mitigated with layers of cloth, wool, or felt. The fabric trapped air, slowing heat loss and creating a warmer interior environment. Beyond function, the visual appeal of these wall hangings transformed cold halls into vibrant, humanized spaces where warmth and aesthetic pleasure coexisted seamlessly. Smaller, more modest households also adopted similar methods. Strips of cloth, quilted wall hangings, and layered fabrics were common in cottages and farmhouses. While not as elaborate as the grand tapestries of the nobility, they were highly effective. In addition to slowing heat loss, the fabrics reduced drafts that crept along uneven walls or between logs in timbered structures. Households understood that the warmth radiated by the fireplace or captured in heated bricks could be preserved longer if surfaces were treated thoughtfully, and wall coverings provided a practical low-cost solution. Wall hangings were often strategically positioned. Areas near the hearth, beds, or seating were prioritized, ensuring that heat was reflected or retained where people spent the most time. Rooms used primarily for storage or activity were sometimes left bare, conserving textiles for spaces where warmth was critical. This selective approach demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of microclimates. Not every part of the home needed to be equally warm, only those spaces occupied for extended periods. Efficiency and practicality guided domestic decoration as much as aesthetics. In addition to fabric, other reflective or insulating materials were employed. Polished metals, sometimes embedded in furniture or paneling, were used to bounce heat back into the room. Plastered walls could be layered with lime or clay, adding mass that absorbed warmth during the day and released it slowly at night. In Japan, sliding screens called fusuma, covered in paper or silk, helped contain heat in living spaces, illustrating that cultures worldwide recognized the value of wall treatments in heat management. These methods were both deliberate and adaptive, shaped by climate, available resources, and local craftsmanship. Ceilings were treated similarly. In homes with exposed beams or thatched roofs, hanging textiles or woven mats could reduce heat loss upward. In larger chambers, thick tapestries draped from beams added visual warmth and helped keep rooms habitable during the harshest weather. Even floors were considered part of the insulating strategy, with rushes, straw or rugs laid to prevent cold from radiating upward. Walls, floors, and ceilings together formed a comprehensive system of containment, demonstrating that pre-modern humans understood their homes as dynamic, three-dimensional heat management systems. The use of wall coverings extended to hallways, staircases, and corridors. In multi-room homes, drafts could travel along long passageways, carrying heat away from living quarters. To counter this, thick curtains or hanging textiles were used to block corridors or cover open doorways. Even narrow strips of fabric along windowless walls helped slow the movement of cold air. These interventions were subtle, yet cumulative. Small adjustments added up to significant improvements in comfort and survivability. In northern climates, wall coverings often served an additional purpose, protecting interiors from moisture. Cold stone or timber walls could absorb dampness, making rooms feel colder and increasing the risk of illness. Fabrics, layered boards, or insulating plaster helped separate inhabitants from these effects. By creating a barrier between human-occupied space and the chill of the wall, households simultaneously improved warmth and health. The ingenuity of these adaptations reflects both practical experience and an intuitive understanding of the relationship between materials and comfort. Wealth, of course, influenced the scale and sophistication of wall coverings. Noble households could afford tapestries, decorated panelling, and elaborate wall treatments, while peasants relied on straw, cloth, and locally available textiles. Yet the underlying principle was universal. Heat, once generated, needed to be retained. Regardless of class, the cold was a challenge to be mitigated through careful intervention in the structure itself. Decoration, in this sense, was inseparable from function, and domestic artistry often doubled as survival strategy. Even furniture played a role in wall-based heat management. Cabinets, chests, and benches placed against walls created additional insulation, trapping air and reducing heat loss. Beds pushed against walls, particularly in cottages and longhouses, benefited from these indirect measures. Household arrangements were therefore highly deliberate, combining wall coverings, furniture placement, and textiles to create a layered system of heat retention. Observing the placement of objects in historical homes reveals that every element had both social and thermal significance. In public buildings, similar strategies applied. Churches, halls, and inns often hung tapestries, cloth banners, or wooden panels to retain heat and reduce drafts. Patrons, congregants, and travellers benefited from these seemingly decorative features, which in reality were highly functional. Even modest inns in colder regions used heavy curtains to create warmer private spaces, demonstrating that awareness of wall insulation extended beyond domestic environments into public life. The science of heat reflection and retention, while not formally defined in pre-modern times, was intuitively understood. Families learned through observation, trial, and error that certain materials held heat longer, trapped cold more effectively, or reflected warmth from the hearth. These lessons, passed from generation to generation, became embedded in domestic culture. The careful layering of wall coverings, placement of tapestries, and use of reflective surfaces represent centuries of accumulated knowledge, practical yet sophisticated in its application. In essence, wall coverings transformed rooms into habitable spaces during long winters. They complemented the heat of the hearth, the insulation of clothing, the warmth of shared bodies, and the targeted heat of bed warmers and footstoves. Without these thoughtful interventions, interior spaces would have remained harsh, uncomfortable, and even dangerous during the coldest months. Walls, once considered mere boundaries, became active participants in the creation of human comfort. Ultimately, the use of heat-reflecting materials and wall coverings exemplifies the ingenuity of pre-central heating households. Humans did not rely solely on fire or clothing. They integrated architecture, textiles, and craftsmanship into a holistic system of warmth. Every surface, every layer, every choice in material contributed to survival. It was a quiet, often overlooked aspect of domestic life, yet one that profoundly shaped the experience of winter. Long before central heating, humans discovered that warmth was not only generated by fire or clothing, but also by other living creatures and deep human understanding. Whether domestic companions or livestock played a surprising yet vital role in survival during harsh winters. Across cultures and centuries, people learned to integrate animals into their homes and sleeping arrangements, relying on their body heat to stave off the chill, protect vulnerable family members, and enhance comfort in ways that were both practical and affectionate. Cats were among the earliest and most common contributors to domestic warmth. Agile and self-sufficient, they gravitated instinctively to the warmest spots in a home, near the hearth, on thick blankets, or at the foot of beds. Families quickly recognized the practical benefit of this behavior. A cat curled in the center of a blanket added tangible warmth, and its proximity offered comfort and companionship. In cottages and farmhouses, cats were welcome additions not only for pest control but also for the subtle, consistent heat they provided. The presence of cats during long winter nights became a domestic tradition, blending practicality with affection. Dogs, larger and often more stationary than cats, contributed more substantial warmth. Many rural households allowed dogs to sleep indoors, particularly in the coldest months, placing them near doorways, hearths, or beds. Their body heat radiated outward, creating microclimates of comfort. In some cultures, dogs were trained to lie close to the feet of family members, effectively acting as portable radiators. Beyond warmth, these animals offered protection, companionship, and reassurance, making them essential participants in the winter household ecosystem. Smaller livestock were also integrated into homes as temporary or seasonal sources of heat. Pigs, sheep, and goats were often kept in lofts or stables connected to the main living area, allowing their rising body heat to warm sleeping quarters above or adjacent to their pens. In northern European longhouses, children sometimes slept above or near animals, benefiting from the steady, low-grade warmth radiating from below. This arrangement was both practical and efficient, allowing households to conserve fuel while keeping vulnerable family members safer from the cold. In Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, similar strategies were common. Families would store sheep, goats, or even cattle in attached barns or small enclosures during the winter, creating a buffer of warmth between living spaces and the external environment. The animals' heat mitigated drafts and helped maintain a higher ambient temperature, particularly during nights when fires burned low or when fuel supplies were scarce. Such practices were not merely incidental, they were integrated into the design and rhythm of domestic life, forming part of the seasonal strategy for surviving winter. Pets and livestock were not the only animals involved in warmth strategies. Birds, particularly chickens and ducks, were sometimes housed near sleeping areas, their small bodies contributing incremental heat. In some rural households, poultry coops were built adjacent to kitchens or living rooms, so the combined heat from birds, cooking fires, and human bodies created a surprisingly effective system of micro-warming. These practices illustrate that pre-modern households treated every living creature as both a companion and a resource, seamlessly integrating warmth into the social and ecological fabric of home life. The psychological dimension of animal warmth cannot be overlooked. The presence of cats, dogs, or livestock provided comfort that went beyond the physical. The knowledge that a warm body was nearby, the rhythmic breathing of a sleeping animal, the subtle movement of a cat on a blanket, all contributed to a sense of safety and security. In households where drafts could pierce walls and floors, and where harsh winters made sleep precarious, the presence of animals offered reassurance, reducing anxiety and allowing more restful rest. Heat, in this sense, was both physical and emotional. Animal warmth also encouraged creativity in domestic architecture. Lofts, partitions, and sleeping platforms were often designed with the movement and placement of animals in mind. Beds might be raised to capture the heat rising from livestock below, or arranged near hearths where animals naturally congregated. In many cases, animals became central to household planning, with their heat and presence dictating furniture arrangement, room usage, and sleeping patterns. Humans and animals coexisted in symbiotic warmth, each adapting to the other's needs. Cultural traditions also reinforced the use of animal warmth. In Japan, small dogs or cats were often encouraged to sleep on futons with their owners. In rural England, cats and dogs were considered essential members of winter households, their movements around the hearth carefully observed. Scandinavian longhouses routinely incorporated livestock into floor plans to capture and retain heat. These practices reflect the universality of the principle. Warmth, when scarce, could be shared and conserved through strategic human-animal interaction. Safety and hygiene were naturally concerns. Animals indoors required careful management to prevent disease, dirt, or fire hazards. Bedding for animals was often separated from human sleeping areas, while still allowing the transfer of heat. Floors, lofts, and partitions were designed to accommodate waste and protect inhabitants from cold surfaces. The combination of warmth and sanitation demonstrates the sophistication of domestic strategies long before formal knowledge of microbiology or building science. Historical records reveal that this integration of animals and humans for warmth persisted well into the 18th and 19th centuries. Even as houses became larger, more insulated, and fireplaces more efficient, Families continued to allow animals inside during winter months. It was not simply habit, it remained an effective strategy for conserving heat and comfort. In regions with extreme cold, the body heat of animals could literally mean the difference between survival and illness during prolonged nights. Animals also enabled microdistribution of warmth. Where a fireplace or stove could heat a room unevenly, a sleeping dog or cat could provide targeted heat to a specific area. Heated livestock below sleeping platforms extended warmth upward, while small pets could occupy the nooks and corners that remained cold. This distributed, adaptive approach to heating spaces is strikingly modern in principle, predating the technological precision of contemporary climate control. Humans leveraged the natural thermodynamics of living creatures long before centralized systems existed. The social implications of animal warmth are equally significant. Pets and livestock reinforced bonds, encouraged care, and structured daily routines. Feeding, grooming, and positioning animals became intertwined with domestic rhythms and survival strategies. Warmth was not only a matter of physics, it was embedded in the routines, attentions, and affections of household life. Every night, arranging animals near hearths or beds required deliberate planning, reflecting the integration of heat management into daily life and cultural practice. Ultimately, animals were indispensable contributors to the winter household. Cats, dogs, and livestock provided physical warmth, psychological comfort, and practical solutions in homes without central heating. Their presence shaped architecture, sleeping arrangements, and domestic routines. Humans and animals collaborated in an age-old partnership, creating a shared environment in which heat, life, and survival were intertwined. The simple act of an animal curling up on a blanket, a dog resting at the hearth, or a sheep housed beneath sleeping quarters demonstrates both ingenuity and humanity. In conclusion, the pre-modern household was a complex ecosystem in which warmth was generated, captured, and shared through fire, clothing, architecture, and living creatures alike. Animals were not ancillary. They were central to survival strategies, demonstrating the resourcefulness, adaptability, and empathy of humans facing winter's challenges. Warmth was not only created and retained through fire, architecture, became both tangible and communal. It could also be generated from within, a testament to the intertwined lives of humans and animals. Before the invention of central heating, consuming hot liquids and foods was a direct and effective method of staying warm. Across cultures, centuries, and climates, families relied on soups, stews, teas, and heated beverages to stave off the cold. Eating and drinking became a deliberate strategy, an intimate interface between the body and the environment, providing both comfort and survival in harsh winters. Soup and stew were among the most ubiquitous sources of internal heat. A bubbling cauldron over the hearth not only nourished the body, but radiated warmth to the surrounding space. Ingredients such as root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats contributed calories, which the body converted into energy and ultimately heat. The practice of preparing and consuming hot meals multiple times a day ensured a steady supply of internal warmth, complementing the external heat of fireplaces, stoves, and portable devices. Cooking itself became part of the domestic heating strategy. In many households, the preparation of soups and stews was a ritualistic process. Large pots were filled with water and ingredients, set near the fire to simmer slowly, allowing heat to permeate the kitchen or living area. The aroma and warmth drew families together, encouraging communal activity around the hearth. The act of stirring, tending, and seasoning was not only culinary but also functional, maintaining the fire and ensuring that the heat produced by cooking was retained within the home. Meals were therefore a fusion of nourishment, warmth, and social cohesion. Hot beverages played an equally critical role. Tea in England, coffee in continental Europe, and herbal infusions across Asia provided portable, consumable warmth. Boiling water over the hearth allowed individuals to sip throughout the day, maintaining body temperature even while performing chores, travelling, or working in colder rooms. The temperature of the beverage provided an immediate sensation of heat, while the caffeine or sugar content offered energy to sustain metabolism, indirectly increasing internal warmth. Drinking, in this sense, was both sensory comfort and practical strategy. Alcoholic beverages were sometimes consumed for warmth, particularly in colder climates where fermented drinks were available. Mulled wine, hot cider, and spiced spirits were heated and consumed to create a warming sensation. While the physiological effects were temporary and in excess counterproductive, moderate use provided comfort and ritualized social interaction, contributing to morale and the perception of heat. These beverages often accompanied meals, integrating warmth into both nutrition and social life. Hot bread and freshly baked foods also contributed to thermal comfort. The process of baking itself generated heat that permeated kitchens and nearby rooms. Hearth ovens and baking fires created ambient warmth, which households captured and retained with textiles, wool coverings, and strategically placed furniture. Consuming bread and other heated foods provided calories, which fueled metabolism and generated internal heat, creating a dual effect. The room became warmer, and the body received sustenance to maintain its own warmth. Cultural variations illustrate the universality of consuming warmth. In Scandinavian countries, thick porridges, stews, and mulled beverages were staples of winter diets, while in Eastern Europe, hearty soups with preserved meats and root vegetables sustained families through long nights. In Asia, hot teas and broth served a similar purpose, integrating nutrition with thermal comfort. Despite differences in ingredients and preparation methods, the principle remained consistent. Heat could be ingested, retained, and distributed by the body itself. Timing and routine were essential. Meals and hot drinks were often scheduled to coincide with the coldest parts of the day. Early morning before the hearth fire fully warmed the home, late evening before bed, and during work breaks in unheated rooms. Families learned to align their consumption patterns with natural temperature fluctuations, maximizing both caloric intake and the subjective sensation of warmth. In this sense, eating was not only sustenance but also a form of time-based thermal management. The design of cooking equipment also reflected the importance of consuming warmth. Heavy iron pots, cauldrons, and kettles retained heat for extended periods, releasing it slowly to maintain a continuous source of warmth. Spouts and lids helped conserve temperature, while clay or brick ovens radiated heat long after the fire had diminished. Every piece of kitchenware was both a cooking tool and a heat-retaining device, demonstrating the integration of culinary activity with domestic thermal strategy. Households also employed simple techniques to maximize the warming effect of food and drink. Bowls and mugs were pre-warmed near the fire, and insulated coverings were used to keep meals hot until consumed. Leftovers were often reheated on the hearth, ensuring that each portion provided optimal warmth. Even utensils played a role, with metal spoons transferring heat efficiently to hands and mouths, while wooden tools prevented unnecessary heat loss. In essence, the entire act of eating and drinking became a carefully orchestrated engagement with thermal comfort. Children and the elderly were especially targeted beneficiaries of warm foods and drinks. Because their bodies were more vulnerable to cold, caregivers prioritized hot meals, broths, and drinks to maintain internal heat. The placement of meals near beds, in shared sleeping areas, or close to the hearth ensured that warmth from consumption complemented external heat sources. These measures were subtle, attentive, and highly effective, reflecting a deep understanding of physiology and human needs long before formal knowledge of thermoregulation existed. Medicinal infusions also doubled as heat sources. Herbs boiled in water, often with honey or other sweeteners, provided both nutritional and therapeutic benefits. The warmth of the liquid alleviated chills, while the chemical properties of the ingredients aided digestion and circulation. In winter months, these beverages were consumed multiple times a day, integrating health maintenance with warmth management. The act of sipping a hot infusion became a ritual of comfort, care, and survival. The combination of hot foods, drinks, and ambient heat sources created a synergistic effect. Consuming warmth internally complemented external strategies like fireplaces, portable heat devices, wall coverings, and animal companions. Together, these interventions formed a comprehensive system, each element reinforcing the others. Humans were able to adapt to winter's severity not through any single innovation, but through a layered, multi-sensory approach that engaged architecture, material science, nutrition, and social behavior simultaneously. Ultimately, the preparation and consumption of hot foods and drinks illustrate the ingenuity and adaptability of pre-central heating societies. Warmth was not passive, it required planning, creativity, and participation. Families coordinated hearth fires, cooking schedules, and meal times to optimize both external and internal heat. Each sip, each bite, each simmering pot contributed to survival, comfort, and the human capacity to endure harsh winters. In this way, heat became an embodied
invention of central
experience, one that
heating,
humans discovered that warmth could
nourished
be
the body
multiplied
and
simply by
sustained
being
life
together.
itself.
Long, cold nights prompted families, friends, and even communities to rely on shared body heat as a practical strategy for survival. Communal sleeping, a practice spanning continents and centuries, was not only a cultural norm but a vital method of retaining and generating warmth in the absence of sophisticated heating systems. The principle was simple: the closer bodies were, the more heat could be preserved, creating microclimates that allowed humans to endure bitter winters. In rural households across Europe, it was common for entire families to sleep in a single room, often sharing a large bed or sleeping platform. This arrangement maximized the warmth generated by human bodies and reduced exposure to drafts that might penetrate unheated corners of the room. Children, adults, and sometimes even elderly relatives would cluster together, bodies pressed against one another to conserve heat. The practice was utilitarian, yet it also carried emotional significance, reinforcing bonds and providing comfort in harsh conditions. Physical proximity became a strategy for survival, a tangible demonstration of care and mutual reliance. In many northern European cottages, long benches or raised sleeping platforms were built to accommodate communal sleeping arrangements. Layers of straw, rushes, blankets, and quilts added insulation, while the combined body heat of multiple occupants ensured a relatively stable internal temperature. Households discovered that a room shared by several people could remain significantly warmer than one occupied by a single individual, even when the fire burned low or when external temperatures plummeted. Heat became a shared resource, managed collectively and efficiently. Communal sleeping was not confined to immediate family units. In multi-generational households, grandparents, parents, and children often shared beds or adjacent sleeping areas. In agricultural communities, hired hands, apprentices, or seasonal workers might sleep in the same space, creating a dense, human-powered source of warmth. The strategy was simple: the more bodies present, the more thermal energy available, and the longer it could be retained overnight. This arrangement, though utilitarian, required coordination, care, and a sense of shared responsibility to be comfortable and effective. Across cultures, variations of communal sleeping adapted to climate, architecture, and social norms. In Scandinavia, for example, lofted sleeping areas above animal pens allowed humans to benefit from both shared body heat and warmth rising from livestock. In Japan, family members would sleep closely together on futons, often layered to maximize insulation. In the American colonial context, warming rooms were established, where multiple individuals slept near the hearth to conserve heat. Each culture adapted the principle to its environment, demonstrating a universal understanding of human thermodynamics long before scientific theory formalized these observations. Even in urban environments, communal sleeping was common among the working class. In tenements or crowded quarters, families shared beds or rooms to survive cold winters without access to private heating. Inns, hostels, and boarding houses employed similar practices, with patrons sharing beds or rooms to maximize warmth. These arrangements reflect both necessity and ingenuity, revealing how humans leveraged social structures to counter environmental challenges. Warmth in this context became a communal asset, distributed through proximity and cooperation. The psychological effects of communal sleeping were equally significant. Proximity during cold nights reduced anxiety, provided reassurance, and strengthened familial and social bonds. In the absence of mechanical heating, the warmth of another human body became not only a physical shield but a source of emotional security. Stories from historical records often describe children sleeping between parents, or elders positioned centrally within a group, both for maximum warmth and comfort. Body heat was simultaneously a practical tool and a medium of care, blending survival with intimacy. Clothing and bedding complemented communal arrangements. Layering quilts, blankets, and furs over multiple bodies amplified the effect of shared heat. In some households, specific sleeping arrangements were devised, placing the coldest or most vulnerable individuals in the center of the cluster. Pillows, mats, and insulation beneath the sleeping platform reduced heat loss to the floor, while wall coverings or draped textiles prevented cold drafts from infiltrating the space. Every element worked together to create a thermal ecosystem where the combined body heat of several people was maximized and preserved. Children were often central to these arrangements. Their smaller bodies warmed quickly and radiated heat effectively when nestled between adults or older siblings. In cold climates, infants and toddlers were wrapped in swaddling cloths or placed in shared beds with adults to ensure they remained warm through the night. Historical accounts suggest that parents meticulously arranged sleeping positions to optimize warmth distribution, demonstrating both practical knowledge and a maternal or paternal care. In this way, communal sleeping addressed survival, health, and familial bonding simultaneously. The use of communal sleeping extended to the sick and infirm. Beds were arranged to position vulnerable individuals in the warmest spots, often near the hearth or surrounded by multiple family members. The principle was straightforward. Additional body heat prevented chilling, reduced risk of hypothermia, and provided comfort during illness. Caregivers monitored temperature, adjusted blankets, and coordinated sleeping arrangements to maximize warmth, reflecting a sophisticated empirical understanding of heat retention and human physiology. Cultural traditions reinforced communal sleeping beyond mere practicality. In some societies, storytelling, prayers, or shared rituals accompanied nightly gatherings, adding a social and spiritual dimension to warmth strategies. The act of sleeping together became ritualized, blending survival with cultural expression. Heat was not only a physical necessity but a shared experience, reinforcing identity, cohesion, and resilience within the household or community. Even architectural features were designed to facilitate communal warmth. Large beds, lofted platforms, and alcoves were common in longhouses, cottages, and urban dwellings, reflecting the need to accommodate multiple sleepers efficiently. Hearth placement, wall coverings, and room orientation were coordinated with sleeping arrangements, ensuring that the collective body heat of inhabitants was retained as effectively as possible. Humans, through both design and behavior, created systems in which social and thermal considerations were inseparable. In essence, communal sleeping illustrates the ingenuity of pre-central heating households. Humans understood that warmth could be generated, multiplied, and conserved through proximity. They combined architecture, textiles, and social practice to create shared microclimates capable of sustaining life through frigid nights. Every body added to the cluster increased overall thermal energy, demonstrating a remarkable intuitive grasp of heat management long before the science of thermodynamics was formalized. Ultimately, the practice of sharing sleep, beds, and sleeping spaces represents a fusion of survival, sociality, and care. It was a strategy shaped by necessity, refined by observation, and supported by empathy. In the absence of mechanical heating, humans discovered that togetherness itself was a source of life-sustaining warmth. In the quiet stillness of winter nights, clustered bodies, shared blankets, before central heating arrangements formed our living spaces, a deeply architecture itself was a primary tool for warmth. Builders and inhabitants alike understood that homes needed to respond to the extremes of winter, employing design, materials, and construction techniques that maximized heat retention and minimized drafts. Across centuries and continents, humans developed ingenious strategies for creating buildings that were more than mere shelters. They were carefully engineered to harness, trap, and preserve heat, allowing families to survive even the harshest cold. One of the simplest and most effective architectural strategies was the use of thick walls. In regions with long cold winters, walls were often constructed from stone, brick, or tightly packed earth, materials with high thermal mass. These walls absorbed heat from the sun or hearth during the day and released it slowly at night, maintaining a stable indoor temperature. Even before formal knowledge of thermodynamics, builders recognized that heavier walls retained warmth more effectively than thin ones, creating an internal environment insulated from the external chill. Roof design also played a critical role. Thatched roofs, clay tiles, or wooden shingles provided layers of insulation, while lofted spaces beneath the roof acted as buffers against cold air. In some European cottages, sleeping areas were located in upper lofts, where heat from the hearth below naturally rose, creating warmer sleeping quarters. The combination of insulation and strategic placement of living spaces allowed inhabitants to take advantage of heat distribution patterns inherent in the architecture itself. Windows were another vital consideration. Glass was expensive and often scarce, so windows were small, minimizing heat loss while still admitting light. Wooden shutters, often lined with cloth or leather, could be closed at night to preserve warmth. In some cultures, paper or oiled cloth covered window openings, serving as a simple yet effective barrier against cold drafts. The careful orientation of windows, maximizing southern exposure in the northern hemisphere, allowed homes to capture sunlight during the day, storing solar heat within walls and floors. Doors, too, were designed with thermal efficiency in mind. Heavy wooden doors, sometimes reinforced with insulating materials, limited drafts and kept rooms warmer. In multi-room houses, secondary doors or curtains were often installed inside to create heat pockets, small areas where warmth from the hearth could be concentrated. In medieval European homes, screens or temporary partitions were commonplace, allowing families to control which spaces were heated and which remained cooler, a form of selective climate management that was both practical and energy efficient. Flooring materials contributed as well. Stone or wooden floors could be layered with rushes, straw or mats to reduce heat loss, while some cultures constructed raised sleeping platforms above ground level to capture warmer air. In Scandinavian longhouses, the floors beneath sleeping areas were insulated with layers of straw, fur or textile, preventing cold from seeping upward and amplifying the effect of body heat. Flooring was thus an integral part of architectural warmth, reflecting the holistic approach taken by pre-central heating societies. Fireplace placement and chimney design were central to the architectural strategy. Hearths were often located in the centre of living spaces, maximising heat distribution. In larger homes, multiple fireplaces were carefully positioned to allow warmth to flow through connected rooms. Chimneys were designed to draw smoke efficiently while retaining as much heat as possible within the structure. Some cultures even built masonry stoves or flues that conducted heat from the fire along walls or beneath floors, effectively radiating warmth long after the flames had died down. Architecture and heating were, therefore, inseparable. The overall layout of the home reflected seasonal considerations. Winter quarters were compact, with rooms clustered to conserve heat, while summer arrangements allowed for ventilation. In some regions, homes were built with dual purposes in mind: insulated living spaces for winter and open, airy rooms for warmer months. Courtyards, attached barns, and storage areas were positioned to act as buffers, shielding living quarters from cold winds while retaining heat within the core of the home. Every aspect of design, from wall thickness to room orientation, reflected an intimate understanding of climate adaptation. In northern climates, long houses and timber-framed homes often incorporated lofts, raised platforms, and enclosed with porches to manage seasonal temperatures. Heat from cooking fires, animals, and body clusters could rise to sleeping areas above, while insulated walls and tightly fitted doors minimized loss. Even modest homes in rural regions displayed careful attention to the principles of heat conservation, demonstrating that these strategies were not solely for the wealthy but universally employed as practical necessities. Material choice extended to ceilings, beams, and roof supports. Wooden beams were often covered with insulating layers of straw, reed, or textile to prevent heat from escaping upward. In wealthier households, plastered ceilings or decorative panelling enhanced insulation while maintaining aesthetic appeal. Thatched or layered roofs provided both weatherproofing and thermal efficiency, demonstrating that construction techniques were deliberately tuned to maximize warmth. Every layer, every component, contributed to creating a home capable of sustaining life through the coldest nights. In urban environments, architecture adapted to density and shared walls. Row houses, townhouses, and tenements often shared walls with neighbouring structures, reducing external exposure and preserving heat. Narrow streets and enclosed courtyards minimized wind penetration, creating sheltered microclimates. In some cities, homes were built around communal courtyards with central hearths or ovens, allowing multiple families to benefit from shared warmth while conserving fuel. Architecture became not only a personal strategy, but a community-level solution to cold climates. Even decorative elements had practical applications. Tapestries, wall hangings, and heavy curtains served dual purposes, providing insulation and aesthetic appeal. Thick shutters and door panels were carefully crafted to reduce drafts. Floors layered with rushes, rugs, or straw prevented heat loss to the ground. Architectural design was therefore a combination of engineering, artistry, and lived experience, reflecting centuries of empirical knowledge about human comfort and survival. The integration of architecture and human behaviour was subtle but critical. Hearths were placed in central locations, beds near warm walls or above animal quarters, and doors or partitions arranged to create heat pockets. Families coordinated furniture, bedding, and activity spaces to maximise architectural advantages. Homes were thus dynamic systems where construction, layout, and daily routines combined to retain warmth and sustain life. Architecture was not passive, it actively shaped how heat was generated, distributed, and preserved. Ultimately, seasonal architectural design illustrates the sophistication of pre-central heating societies. Humans did not rely solely on fire, clothing, or portable devices. They engineered their environments to respond to the natural challenges of winter. Walls, floors, ceilings, and room layouts were crafted with warmth in mind, reflecting both practical ingenuity and deep understanding of materials, climate, and human needs. These homes were carefully orchestrated systems where every detail contributed to the preservation of heat and the comfort of those who dwelled within. In essence, architecture became a living partner in the quest for warmth. Homes were designed, constructed, and arranged to trap heat efficiently, providing a stable, comfortable environment through the coldest months. From thick walls to raised sleeping platforms, insulated roofs to strategically placed hearths, every element reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom. In the absence of central heating, humans mastered the art of living with the cold. Long before central heating, transforming clothing was into havens of personal and immediate defense against winter's chill. Observation, humans learned that the body could generate and retain warmth most effectively through careful layering, the use of natural insulating materials, and ingenious fabric technologies developed over centuries. Clothing was not simply fashion or decoration, it was a vital survival tool, a mobile microclimate that allowed individuals to maintain body temperature, perform daily tasks, and endure cold environments for extended periods. Layering was the foundation of winter dressing. Multiple garments worn atop one another trapped pockets of air between layers, creating insulation that slowed the escape of body heat. Undergarments made of linen or wool formed the base, close to the skin, while outer layers of heavier wool, fur, or quilted fabric provided additional warmth. The principle was universal. The more layers, the more effective the insulation. Yet layering required skill, balancing flexibility, comfort, and mobility with maximum heat retention. Too many layers restricted movement, while too few left the wearer exposed. Over centuries, humans mastered this delicate equilibrium. Furs were among the most effective materials for winter clothing. Animal pelts, often with the hair intact, trapped heat efficiently, creating a natural barrier against wind, moisture, and cold. From polar regions to temperate climates, humans relied on fur coats, cloaks, and mittens to survive the harshest conditions. Wolves, foxes, rabbits, and domesticated animals like sheep provided essential materials. Fur was often layered over wool or linen, combining the advantages of multiple textures to optimize insulation. In many societies, the type of fur and method of tanning were carefully chosen to maximize both warmth and durability. Quilted and padded garments represented another innovation. Quilting involved stitching layers of fabric together, often with padding such as wool, cotton, or down, to create garments that retained heat without excessive weight. These designs allowed for movement while offering effective thermal protection. Quilted doublets, coats, and trousers were particularly common in Europe during the medieval and early modern periods, providing warmth for both domestic life and outdoor labour. The stitching itself created additional insulating pockets, illustrating how technique and materials work together to enhance thermal performance. Specialized accessories extended the body's ability to retain warmth. Gloves, mittens, socks, and boots were carefully crafted from furs, wool, or felt. Headwear, including hoods, caps, and ear flaps, prevented heat loss from the head, which can account for a significant portion of body heat in cold conditions. Scarves, shawls, and neck coverings further protected vulnerable areas. Every accessory was designed with the principle of targeted heat retention, ensuring that extremities and sensitive regions remained warm even in harsh outdoor conditions. Clothing innovations were often informed by local climate and available resources. In Scandinavia, layered wool and reindeer fur provided warmth during long, dark winters. In Russia, fur-lined coats, mittens, and boots were essential for survival. In North America, indigenous peoples developed highly specialized garments, such as caribou skin coats and mittens, combining sewing techniques with natural insulating materials to endure sub-zero temperatures. Across continents, the principle remained consistent. Materials, layers, and craftsmanship combined to maximize body heat retention. Textiles themselves evolved to enhance warmth. Wool was favored for its natural insulating properties, moisture-wicking ability, and durability. Linen, though less insulating, provided a comfortable layer next to the skin, helping to manage moisture and prevent chafing. Over time, techniques such as felting, weaving, and fulling were developed to make fabrics denser and more thermally efficient. Even within a single garment, different fabrics were often combined strategically. Insulating materials for the outer layer, moisture-managing fabrics for the inner layer, and padding where maximum protection was needed. Clothing was also adapted to specific activities and social roles. Farmers, shepherds, and hunters required garments that allowed movement while protecting against cold, wet conditions, often integrating leather, fur, and water-resistant fabrics. Urban dwellers and merchants relied on layered wool, quilted doublets, and lined cloaks to maintain warmth during travel or outdoor markets. Nobility and wealthy classes combined function with fashion, creating garments that were visually striking yet retained heat through furs, lining, and dense fabrics. Across all social strata, clothing was both practical and expressive, reflecting the dual need for warmth and social signaling. Seasonal planning of wardrobes was another sophisticated strategy. Winter garments were stored separately from summer clothes, often in accessible locations near sleeping areas or the hearth to retain warmth. Families ensured that the warmest pieces were allocated to the most vulnerable members, children, the elderly, or the infirm. Knowledge of materials, layers, and individual needs was shared across generations, forming an empirical understanding of human thermoregulation that predated modern science. The wardrobe itself became an extension of the domestic strategy for surviving winter. Beyond materials and layering, clothing design accounted for ventilation and moisture management. Excess moisture from sweat or snow could drastically reduce insulation, so garments were tailored to allow movement while preventing damp from contacting the skin. Cloaks with overlapping layers, hoods, and protective outer shells were often water-resistant, while inner layers absorbed moisture without compromising warmth. The balance of breathability and insulation illustrates a sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics in human clothing. Even footwear was critical. Cold feet could quickly chill the entire body, so boots, socks, and shoes were carefully designed with multiple layers, fur linings, and insulated soles. In snowy or wet environments, waterproofing and padding ensured that extremities remained warm and dry. The careful management of heat at the feet and hands demonstrates that pre-modern humans were acutely aware of the importance of extremities in overall body temperature regulation. Cultural and ceremonial garments often incorporated these thermal principles. For example, cloaks and ceremonial robes in Europe and Asia were layered with furs or quilted fabrics, maintaining warmth during processions or outdoor events. Even in formal attire, designers prioritized insulation without compromising style. Clothing was thus both functional and symbolic, blending survival needs with social expression. In essence, clothing innovations were central to human survival before central heating. Through layering, furs, quilted garments, specialized accessories, and attention to materials, humans created mobile, personal systems of heat retention. Clothing was not merely fabric, it was technology, culture, and craft combined, designed to protect the body in harsh environments. Every stitch, layer, and choice of material reflected centuries of accumulated knowledge, observation, and experimentation. Ultimately, these clothing strategies exemplify the ingenuity and adaptability of humans in cold climates. They demonstrate that warmth was pursued through multiple channels: architecture, fire, animals, communal living, food and clothing, each layer reinforcing the others. By understanding the principles of insulation, layering and heat retention, pre-modern humans ensured survival, comfort and productivity, long before central heating made such measures optional. Clothing, in this context, becomes a testament to human creativity and resilience. Fire was the heart haven of light and survival in human dwellings, skill and care. The crackle of flames, the glow of embers, and the careful tending of hearths were daily rituals that defined domestic life. Maintaining a fire was far more than lighting a match or stacking logs. It was a complex, continuous process requiring skill, timing, and foresight. Fuel had to be sourced, prepared, and managed efficiently, ensuring that the household remained warm throughout long winter nights. Fire maintenance began with the careful selection of fuel. Wood was the most common source, but not all wood was equal. Hardwoods such as oak, beech, and ash burned longer and hotter than softwoods, providing steady heat with minimal smoke. Knowledge of local forests, seasonal harvesting, and proper drying techniques was essential. Wet or green wood could smoulder, produce excessive smoke, and fail to retain warmth, while properly seasoned wood delivered consistent, radiant heat. This knowledge, passed down through generations, transformed firekeeping into both science and craft. The preparation of fuel was meticulous. Logs were chopped to appropriate sizes, split to facilitate airflow, and stacked to dry in well-ventilated sheds or covered yards. Families understood that fuel management was a seasonal task. Wood cut in summer or early autumn would be carefully stored to provide warmth through winter. In regions where wood was scarce, alternative fuels, peat, coal, dried dung or straw were harvested and processed with similar care. Each type of fuel required distinct handling, and households learned to adapt techniques to the resources available, creating systems finely tuned to both environment and climate. Lighting the fire itself was an art. Sparks from flint and steel, embers preserved from the previous night, or primitive matches were used to ignite kindling. Small twigs, shavings, or dry grasses formed the initial flame, gradually nurturing larger logs into sustained combustion. Maintaining airflow was crucial. Too little draft smothered the flames, too much scattered embers and accelerated fuel consumption. Hearth design, chimney placement, and flue management were all integral to fire control. Skilled firekeepers understood the subtle balance of heat, oxygen, and fuel, ensuring that warmth was sustained with efficiency and safety. Once ignited, fires required constant attention. Hearths were tended throughout the day and evening, with logs added at intervals to maintain steady heat. Embers were shifted, coals raked, and ash cleared to optimize combustion. In larger households, firekeeping was a shared responsibility. Adults and older children monitored the fire, ensuring that kitchens, living spaces, and sleeping quarters remained sufficiently warm. Fire became both a domestic chore and a source of communal focus, with its maintenance integral to survival. Fuel conservation was another key consideration. Households developed strategies to extend the burn time of valuable wood or peat. Logs were arranged for maximum efficiency, with denser pieces placed beneath lighter ones to maintain steady combustion. Hearths were insulated with stones or metal backplates to radiate heat longer, while cooking and heating were often coordinated to make the most of a single fire. Even partial embers were preserved overnight, smothered with ash or cinders to prevent extinguishment and reignited at dawn. Every ember was precious. Wastage was avoided, reflecting both resource scarcity and the critical importance of continuous warmth. Coal became increasingly important in regions where it was available. In Britain, coal's higher energy density and longer burn time transformed household heating, particularly in urban environments. Coal fires required careful management to prevent smoke, maximize heat, and ensure ventilation. Hearths were redesigned to accommodate coal, chimneys adapted, and stoking techniques refined. Yet the principles remained consistent: steady heat, efficient fuel use, and constant monitoring. Coal represented a technological advancement, but it did not eliminate the need for careful attention or skill in firekeeping. Portable fires and stoves complemented stationary hearths. In some households, small braziers, foot warmers, or bed stoves allowed heat to be directed to specific areas, maximizing comfort while conserving fuel. These devices often required charcoal, embers, or small amounts of wood, allowing inhabitants to enjoy warmth without maintaining large, resource-intensive fires. Portable heating exemplified human ingenuity in directing warmth where it was most needed, blending resource management with practical comfort. Fire was also central to cooking, and the overlap of culinary and thermal management cannot be overstated. Meals were prepared on or near the hearth, allowing the heat generated in cooking to contribute to room temperature. Stews, soups, and boiling water released warmth into living spaces, complementing body heat and insulation. Timing meals with fire tending ensured that warmth was concentrated during periods of high activity, or when inhabitants were most exposed to the cold. In essence, cooking and heating were inseparable, each reinforcing the other in the household strategy for survival. Safety was a constant concern. Sparks, flues, and open flames posed risks, particularly in timber homes or thatched cottages. Fireguards, hearth screens, and careful positioning of fuel reduced the risk of accidental fires. Households also developed routines to manage hot embers safely, preventing burns and damage while retaining maximum thermal benefit. Fire, while essential for warmth, demanded vigilance and respect, and households integrated safety into every aspect of its management. In communal settings, fire management became a coordinated activity. In inns, boarding houses, or shared dwellings, hearths provided warmth for multiple occupants. Fuel had to be rationed, fires monitored, and heat distributed strategically. Larger fires required skilled oversight, with specific individuals responsible for stoking, feeding, and maintaining combustion throughout the day and night. The fire was a lifeline, a centerpiece of domestic organization, and a shared resource upon which survival depended. Even rituals and social practices were shaped by fire. Lighting the hearth in the morning, tending embers in the evening, and gathering around the flames were central to daily routines. Fires provided warmth, light, and a focus for domestic life. Families often coordinated activities around fire cycles, planning meals, chores, and rest periods to coincide with optimal heat. Fire in this sense was both physical and cultural, a practical necessity entwined with rhythm, ritual, and social cohesion. Ultimately, fire maintenance and fuel management illustrate the sophistication and foresight of pre-central heating societies. Humans transformed raw resources into sustained, controlled warmth, creating microclimates that allowed life to continue comfortably in cold environments. Every log chopped, ember preserved, and hearth tended reflected accumulated knowledge, observation, and careful planning. Fire was the lifeblood of warmth, central to architecture, clothing, food, animals, and communal practices, a unifying thread connecting all strategies for survival in winter. In conclusion, managing a fire required skill, attentiveness, and understanding. Fuel selection, preparation, ignition, monitoring, and safety measures all demanded knowledge passed through generations. Without centralized heating systems, fire was humanity's primary tool for survival, and households became adept at maximizing its warmth while conserving resources. The careful orchestration of combustion, insulation, and daily life demonstrates an intimate, empirical understanding of heat and its management, reflecting both human ingenuity central heating, humans developed not only practical strategies but also rituals and traditions to cope with winter's harshness. Beyond clothing, architecture, fire, food, and animals, cultural practices provided psychological warmth, communal cohesion, and structured routines that enhanced physical survival. Winter was a time of challenge, but it was also a season shaped by ritual, ceremony, and collective understanding of how to endure the cold. These traditions, passed down over generations, illustrate the human capacity to transform necessity into meaning, and survival into shared experience. One of the most common forms of cultural warmth involved seasonal festivals and gatherings. In Northern Europe, celebrations like Yule or the winter solstice served multiple purposes. Fires were lit, feasts were prepared, and homes were adorned with greenery, candles, and decorations. These gatherings coincided with the darkest and coldest days of the year, providing communal heat, both literal and metaphorical. Large fires at the centre of village halls, longhouses, or communal spaces radiated warmth to attendees, while shared meals ensured that everyone had the calories needed to sustain internal body heat. These events were both practical and symbolic, reinforcing social bonds while addressing the very real need for warmth. Storytelling, song and music were often central to winter traditions. Families and communities would gather around the hearth to share tales, sing carols, or perform dances. These activities encouraged movement, circulation, and engagement, all of which contributed to warmth. The act of gathering together created clusters of bodies, maximizing heat retention, while the psychological engagement alleviated the emotional toll of long, cold nights. Rituals of sound and movement became extensions of physical strategies, demonstrating how culture and survival were intimately linked. Certain rituals were specifically designed to maximize the use of fire and heat. Candlelit ceremonies, bonfires, and torchlit processions not only provided light, but also directed warmth toward groups of people. Hearths were tended ceremonially, with special attention to fuel preparation and placement of logs, ensuring that fires burned brightly during festivals or seasonal events. In some regions, households engaged in warming rituals, where families would gather around embers, share blankets, or distribute heated objects to vulnerable members. These practices combined practical knowledge of heat with cultural symbolism, transforming the simple act of warming into a shared, meaningful experience. Food and drink traditions were similarly entwined with ritual warmth. Winter feasts, hot beverages, and spiced dishes were not only nutritious but also ceremonial. The preparation of mulled wines, hot teas, soups, and stews often involved communal participation, turning cooking into both a practical and social act. Families coordinated mealtimes with fire tending, ensuring that warmth from cooking complemented other strategies. Even the choice of ingredients, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices, reflected a cultural understanding of how to optimize internal heat while celebrating seasonal abundance. Sleeping arrangements were also influenced by ritual and tradition. Families and communities developed customary practices around bed sharing, body clustering, and the use of heated objects such as hot stones, bricks, or portable bed stoves. Specific sleeping orders were sometimes followed, placing infants and elderly members in the warmest positions. In multi-generational households, customs dictated the arrangement of beds, the layering of blankets, and the timing of bedtimes to maximize both heat and comfort. These sleeping rituals reflect a sophisticated interplay of social care and practical knowledge, demonstrating that warmth was as much about human relationships as it was about fire or insulation. Animal-related customs further reinforced warmth strategies. In agrarian societies, livestock were often brought closer to human living spaces during the coldest months. Certain rituals dictated the care and placement of animals to optimize heat distribution, while festivals often incorporated animals symbolically, acknowledging their contribution to survival. Cats, dogs, and other domestic companions were valued not only for companionship but also for their thermal presence, and traditions frequently reflected this dual importance. Cultural practices therefore intertwined practical heating strategies with social and symbolic meaning. Textiles and decorations played a role as well. Wall hangings, curtains, and tapestries were not merely ornamental. They were integrated into ritualized seasonal practices. During winter, homes were adorned with thick fabrics, often passed down through generations, which insulated spaces and reduced drafts. The act of draping walls or covering floors became a ritual of preparation, transforming the environment into a protected, comforting space. These customs combined aesthetics, warmth, and symbolism, creating spaces that nurtured both body and spirit. Rituals also extended to the management of firewood and heating resources. In some communities, the cutting, stacking, and seasoning of wood were accompanied by prayers, blessings, or festive songs. The act of preparing fuel was both practical and ceremonial, acknowledging the importance of fire in sustaining life through winter. Careful attention to fuel ensured that warmth could be maintained continuously, while ritual imbued the labor with meaning, reinforcing social cohesion and shared responsibility. Clothing and layering had their own customs. Certain garments were reserved for winter festivals, ceremonies, or communal gatherings. Furs, cloaks, and quilted garments were not only functional, but also symbolic of status, preparedness, and care. Dressing rituals, especially for special occasions, combined thermal efficiency with social meaning, reinforcing the interdependence of survival and culture. Layering was both an everyday necessity and a ceremonial practice, highlighting the multifaceted role of clothing in winter life. Psychological warmth was central to all these traditions. The perception of heat, safety, and comfort was amplified through ritual, storytelling, and shared activity. Singing, dancing, laughing, or simply gathering together around the hearth created a sense of collective resilience, allowing humans to endure extended periods of cold. Emotional warmth reinforced physical survival, demonstrating that human ingenuity addressed both material and psychological challenges of winter. Rituals made the cold not only bearable but meaningful, transforming hardship into shared experience. Religious and spiritual practices often incorporated warmth as well. Candles, hearth fires, incense, and ritual objects provided both heat and symbolic illumination. Seasonal observances connected communities with natural cycles, reinforcing the understanding that warmth was both a physical and metaphysical necessity. These practices often dictated household routines, fire tending, and communal activity, integrating survival strategies into cultural life. Ritual and practicality became inseparable, forming a holistic approach to enduring winter. In conclusion, cultural rituals and traditions were a final, vital layer in the human strategy for warmth. They reinforced fire management, communal sleeping, clothing practices, and dietary habits, embedding survival within meaning, ceremony, and shared experience. Through festivals, storytelling, sleep arrangements, and seasonal customs, humans created structured, predictable, and emotionally supportive systems to navigate the cold. Warmth was not merely a physical challenge, it was a cultural endeavour, a network of practices that combined ingenuity, care, and communal cohesion. Winter in pre-central heating societies was both a challenge and a season of rich human creativity. Through ritual, tradition, and social practice, people transformed necessity into culture, survival into shared meaning, and cold into a context for community, comfort, and continuity. These customs remind us that warmth is never merely a matter of temperature. It is woven into relationships, habits,